Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Can you really trust the space around you when night falls? I've always considered myself a rational person. The kind who scoffs at ghost stories and explains away strange noises as settling foundations or aging pipes. That was before I moved into the Westlake house. Before I understood that some buildings aren't just structures of wood and concrete, but organisms that breathe, evolve, and hunger. My name is Daniel Mercer, and until 3 weeks ago, I was a successful architect with a promising career in Boston. The stress of city life and a recent divorce had left me craving solitude and a fresh start. When I found the listing for the Victorian house on the outskirts of Black River, a small town nestled between mountains and dense forests, it seemed perfect. 3 bedrooms, a spacious office for my drafting table, original hardwood floors, and most importantly, distance from my past. The real estate agent, Mrs. Henderson, was oddly eager to close the deal. Such a gorgeous home, she kept saying, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. Just needs someone who appreciates its character. Character. What a loaded word that turned out to be. The first few days were uneventful. I spent most of my time unpacking, setting up my office, and exploring the nearby town. The house was larger than I needed, high ceilings, a winding staircase, rooms that echoed with my solitary footsteps. But there was something comforting about its solidity, its permanence. I remember running my hands along the ornate wooden banister, thinking about all the people who had touched this same surface over the decades. It was on the 4th night that I noticed something off. I had been working late, finalizing designs for a potential client. The house had grown cold despite the heating system, which was common in these older buildings. I was about to call it a night when I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from inside the walls. At first, I assumed it was mice. Annoying, but expected in a rural Victorian. Yet as I made my way upstairs to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hallway seemed longer. I paused halfway up, looking back down. Had there always been that many steps? I was tired, I reasoned. Perspective gets distorted when you're exhausted. In my bedroom, I noticed something else. The doorway to my ensuite bathroom appeared narrower than I remembered. I actually had to turn sideways slightly to enter, which hadn't been necessary before. I blinked hard, chalking it up to fatigue playing tricks on my perception. That night, I dreamed of corridors that stretched endlessly, of doors that opened to reveal nothing but brick walls, of windows that looked out onto impossible landscapes. I woke several times, disoriented, certain I had heard footsteps in the hallway, light and deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. Morning brought clarity and reasonable explanations. Old houses made noise. Dreams were just subconscious anxieties taking form. I laughed at myself over coffee, watching the sunrise paint the kitchen in warm light. But as I walked through the house that day, I couldn't ignore the persistent thought that something had shifted. The distance from the kitchen to my office seemed greater. The window in the living room was positioned slightly higher than I recalled. Small discrepancies that individually meant nothing, but collectively whispered that something wasn't right. That evening, I measured the hallway upstairs. 47 feet. I wrote it down in my notebook, feeling ridiculous but needing the reassurance of empirical data. I was washing dishes when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Through the kitchen window, I could see that other houses on the street remained brightly lit. No general power issues, then. Just my house. Just me. The scratching in the walls returned that night, more pronounced. It moved, starting near the living room fireplace, traveling up through the ceiling, then continuing along the upstairs hallway, pausing outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, listening, as the scratching lingered there for nearly a minute before slowly retreating. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat up in bed, back against the headboard, listening to the house. There were new sounds now, a distant thumping, like something heavy being dragged across floor, occasional creaks that couldn't be explained by temperature changes, and once, just as dawn approached, what sounded distinctly like a child's giggle, muffled but unmistakable. I've never had children. No one in this house should have children. In the gray morning light, I checked my notebook and remeasured the hallway. 51 feet. 4 feet longer than yesterday. I stood there, measuring tape extended, trying to process what this meant. Homes don't grow. It's architecturally impossible without visible signs of construction. Yet the evidence was literally in my hands. I spent the day researching the history of Westlake House online. Built in 1897 by lumber baron Thomas Westlake. Passed through several families. Nothing particularly tragic or noteworthy, though there were gaps in its ownership, periods where it stood empty for years at a time. One forum post caught my attention. A local history enthusiast mentioned that the house had been architecturally innovative for its time with unusual interior features that seemed to defy conventional design principles. No elaboration followed. That night, I decided to stay awake. Armed with a flashlight and my phone's camera, I stationed myself in the living room, determined to document any strange occurrences. The transformation began at exactly midnight. It started with the walls. A subtle ripple, like muscles flexing beneath skin, passed across the full wallpaper. Then the fireplace shuddered, the mantelpiece elongating by several inches. The ceiling seemed to inhale, rising imperceptibly higher. I sat frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. Structures don't move, don't breathe, don't live. A door I had never noticed before appeared in the far corner of the room, materializing not suddenly, but through a gradual process of emergence, as if it had always been there but was only now coming into focus. My rational mind grasped for explanations: hallucination, dream, carbon monoxide poisoning. I pinched myself hard enough to leave a mark. I was awake. The scratching in the walls grew louder, more insistent. Not mice. Something larger, something with purpose. Then came the whispers, too faint to make out words, but distinctly human. They seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room with their urgent, secretive hiss. I raised my phone to take a video, but the screen showed only static. When I tried to retreat to the kitchen, I discovered that the doorway had shrunk to half its normal size. I would have to crawl to pass through. The house was transforming around me, becoming something else entirely. And I was trapped inside it as the metamorphosis accelerated. I backed toward the front door, my final escape route. As my hand closed around the knob, the whispers suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell. Then a voice, clear, close, and terribly familiar, spoke directly into my ear. "Welcome home, Daniel. We've been waiting for you to notice us." I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs. No one was there. But the room had changed again. It now resembled my childhood bedroom, down to the model airplanes hanging from the ceiling and the faded blue wallpaper. Except everything was slightly wrong, the proportions distorted, the colors too vivid, the shadows too deep. And written on the wall above what had become my childhood bed, in what looked disturbingly like dried blood, was a message. The house remembers what you've forgotten. I don't remember what happened next. I woke up on the living room floor as sunlight streamed through the windows. The house appeared normal again. No strange door, no transformed room. But when I checked my notebook and measured the hallway again, it was 55 feet long. The house was still growing. And somewhere deep within its expanding walls, something was growing with it, something that knew my name, knew my past, and was waiting for me to remember what I'd apparently tried so hard to forget. I spent most of the following day convincing myself I had experienced some kind of breakdown. Stress, isolation, the unfamiliarity of a new home, all reasonable explanations for what had happened. I even called my doctor back in Boston, describing vague symptoms that might indicate a neurological issue. He recommended I come in for tests, but that would mean leaving the house. And something told me that's exactly what it didn't want me to do. Not the house, but whatever lived within it. By afternoon, I had almost convinced myself that I dreamed the whole episode. The hallway still measured 55 feet, but I probably made an error the first time. Old houses settled. Perception could be unreliable. I drove into town, desperate for human interaction. The local diner, Maples, was nearly empty when I arrived. I took a seat at the counter, ordered coffee, and tried to appear casual as I asked the waitress, her name tag read Eleanor, about Westlake House. "Oh, you're staying there?" She paused while pouring my coffee, her expression shifting subtly. Not many folks last long in that place. "What do you mean?" I kept my voice even, though my heart had begun to race. Eleanor looked around, then leaned closer. "Nothing official, mind you. But that house has a reputation. People move in, then move out within months. Sometimes weeks. Never say why, exactly. Just that it doesn't feel right. Has anyone ever mentioned changes in the structure itself?" She frowned. "What kind of changes?" I hesitated, suddenly aware of how crazy I would sound. "Nothing specific. Just wondering if there were known issues. Foundation problems, that sort of thing." Eleanor seemed to consider her next words carefully. "My grandmother used to clean for the Petersons when they lived there in the 70s. She said the house affected people, made them see things that weren't there. Or maybe, she lowered her voice, see things that were there but most people couldn't notice." I felt a chill run through me. Did she ever elaborate? Just that some spaces aren't what they seem. That house sits on what the original inhabitants of this land, the Algonquin people, called a thin place, where the veil between worlds isn't as solid. I thanked her and left a generous tip, my mind racing. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square. I should have been returning to prepare dinner, but instead, I found myself at the local library. The librarian, an older man named Henry Wright, was surprisingly knowledgeable about local history. When I mentioned Westlake House, his eyes lit up with academic interest. "Fascinating structure," he said, leading me to the local history section. Thomas Westlake wasn't just a businessman, he was obsessed with certain esoteric architectural principles. He pulled out a dusty tome, Architectural Anomalies of New England, and flipped to a marked page. There was my house, photographed sometime in the early 20th century. It looked almost identical to its current appearance, except for one detail I hadn't noticed before. Carved into the wooden lintel above the front door was a symbol. A spiral surrounding what appeared to be an eye. Westlake was rumored to be involved with a group called the Order of the Eternal Threshold, Henry explained. They believed certain geometric configurations could, well, it sounds outlandish now, but they thought spaces could be designed to connect with other dimensions. Other dimensions, I repeated flatly. Indeed, the theory was that at certain times, particularly when barriers between worlds were naturally thinner, like during equinoxes or specific lunar phases, a properly designed structure could expand beyond its physical limitations into these other realms. I felt the blood drain from my face. And what would happen to the people inside when this occurred? Henry shrugged. The texts aren't clear. Some suggest transcendence. Others indicate more troubling outcomes. He closed the book. But it's all superstition, of course. Though I will say, Westlake House has had an unusual pattern of ownership. People rarely stay long. By the time I left the library, dusk was falling. I sat in my car, debating whether to find a hotel for the night. But my belongings were at the house. My work. And if I was honest with myself, a part of me needed to know if what I'd experienced was real. The house looked perfectly normal as I approached, a stately Victorian silhouette against the darkening sky. Yet something felt different. It seemed to be waiting for me. Inside, everything appeared unchanged. I checked the hallway again, still 55 feet. I prepared a simple dinner, all the while feeling observed by unseen eyes. As night deepened, I set up a makeshift monitoring system. My laptop would record the living room. A second camera on my phone would watch the hallway. I placed measuring tapes at key points throughout the house, marking their positions with tape. Then I settled in to wait. The transformation began earlier this time, at 11:23. I was in the kitchen when I heard it, the soft groan of wood flexing. The floor beneath my feet seemed to sigh, then shift slightly, as if the entire house was adjusting its posture. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried to the hallway. The measuring tape now indicated 59 feet. It had grown another 4 feet in mere minutes. The walls rippled again, more pronounced than before. The floral wallpaper pattern seemed to animate, the roses slowly rotating to follow my movement as I backed away. "What do you want?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and frightened. A whisper responded, coming from everywhere and nowhere, recognition. The temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me. The overhead light flickered, casting monstrous shadows that moved independently of any source. I retreated to the living room, where my laptop sat recording. The screen showed only snow, the feed disrupted. But something else caught my eye, a photograph on the mantelpiece that hadn't been there before. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It showed a family, mother, father, and a young boy of perhaps 8 years old. The parents' faces were blurred beyond recognition, but the child was clear, a solemn-faced boy with dark hair. Me. A childhood photo I'd never seen before. The frame felt abnormally cold in my grip. As I stared at it, the image began to change. The blurred parents slowly gained definition, but what emerged wasn't human. Their features elongated, eyes too large, mouth stretched in impossible smiles. I dropped the photograph, the glass shattering on the hardwood floor. A door slammed upstairs. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crossed the ceiling above me. The house was expanding faster now. I could actually see the walls moving, stretching like taffy, creating new angles and corners that defied Euclidean geometry. The staircase, once a straight shot to the second floor, now curved unpredictably, additional steps appearing before my eyes until it spiraled beyond vision into darkness. "This isn't real," I whispered, trying to ground myself. "Isn't it?" came the reply, in a voice that was both everywhere and directly beside my left ear. I spun around to find myself face to face with nothing. Empty air. But as I watched, the empty space began to take shape, like clay being molded by invisible hands. It formed into a rough approximation of a human figure, featureless and translucent. "What are you?" My voice was barely audible. The figure tilted what would be its head. "We are the forgotten. The ones who existed between. Thomas brought us here, gave us form through his designs. But then he abandoned us, locked us away in the spaces between walls. Thomas Westlake? But he's been dead for... Time works differently for us. For this house. Haven't you noticed?" I had. Despite the terror, part of my architect's mind had been calculating. The interior dimensions now far exceeded what was physically possible given the exterior size of the house. "What do you want from me?" I asked again. "To be remembered. To finish what was started." The figure drifted closer. "You have the gift, Daniel. Like Thomas did. You can see the spaces between spaces. You can help us complete the transition." "Transition to what?" The figure gestured around. "Full manifestation. The merging of dimensions. We've been trying for so long, but we need a conduit. Someone with the right perception." As if to illustrate, the room stretched impossibly further. The ceiling receded until it was lost in shadow. New doorways formed in the walls, dozens of them, and on angles, some in the floor and ceiling. From these openings emerged more figures, all with that same half-formed, translucent quality. They moved toward me with a strange, floating gait. Panic seized me. I turned to run, but the front door had vanished, replaced by a solid wall. The windows showed not the outside world, but impossible landscapes, twisted forests, cities built at reality-defying angles, bodies of water that flowed upward. The first figure extended what might have been a hand. "You've been preparing for this your whole life, Daniel. Your designs, your fascination with non-traditional spaces, it wasn't coincidence that led you here." And suddenly, memories surfaced, childhood dreams of buildings that changed, of doors that led to different worlds. Architectural designs I created but never shown anyone, believing them too strange, too impractical. Had those been influence? Preparation? The room temperature continued to drop. Ice crystals formed on the walls. My extremities grew numb. "Accept your role," the figure urged. "Help us complete the transformation. The house has chosen you. And if I refuse?" My teeth chattered with cold. The figure seemed to expand, growing larger and more distinct. For a moment, I glimpsed a face forming, ancient, inhuman, yet with eyes that held terrible intelligence. "Then the house will consume you, as it has others who resisted. Your essence will join us, but your consciousness will be diminished." To demonstrate, the floor beneath me suddenly gave way. I fell, dropping into darkness, screaming as gravity pulled me through impossible space. After what felt like minutes of free fall, I landed hard on what felt like wooden floorboards. I found myself in a basement I didn't know existed. The space was vast, far larger than the house's footprint should allow. Stone walls stretched into darkness. The air was stale, ancient. My flashlight revealed what the darkness had hidden: bones. Human remains scattered across the floor, some partially embedded in the walls and ceiling as if the house had grown around them. Among them, I spotted a leather-bound journal. With shaking hands, I picked it up and opened to a random page. The handwriting was erratic, desperate. Day 15, the house continues to expand. New rooms appear nightly. Ellen disappeared yesterday, stepped through a door that shouldn't exist and never returned. I hear her sometimes, calling from within the walls. God help us. The entry was signed J. Peterson, the family Eleanor had mentioned. I heard movement behind me and swung my flashlight around. The beam caught a figure retreating into shadow, humanoid but wrong somehow, its proportions distorted, movements jerky and unnatural. I ran, finding a staircase I didn't recognize and taking it 2 steps at a time. It led to a corridor I'd never seen before, with doors lining both sides. Out of desperate need for escape, I tried one. It opened onto a perfect replica of my childhood bedroom, the same one I'd glimpsed the night before. But sitting on the bed was a young boy. Me, at 8 years old. The child looked up, eyes empty and black. You forgot us, Daniel. You closed the door and pretended we didn't exist. But we've always been here, waiting. I slammed the door shut and tried another. This one revealed what appeared to be my Boston apartment, exactly as I'd left it. For a moment, relief washed over me, a way out. But as I stepped toward it, I noticed subtle wrongness. The furniture was mirrored, reversed from how it should be. And looking out the window showed not the Boston skyline, but an alien landscape of twisted spires. Door after door revealed similar false escapes, places I've lived, worked, visited, all subtly wrong, all populated by those same translucent figures slowly taking more defined form. The house was using my memories, feeding on them to create these spaces. To trap me. When I finally found my way back to what I thought was the living room, it had changed again. The space had expanded to cathedral-like proportions. The walls were now covered in writing, thousands of names, dates, messages of desperation. Previous occupants, I realized. All trapped, just like me. And there, in the center of it all, stood the figure from before, now more solid, more defined. It had taken on an appearance that mixed features from people I knew, my father's eyes, my ex-wife's hands, my childhood friend's stance. The transformation is nearly complete, it said, its voice no longer a whisper but a resonant, multi-toned sound. Soon we will exist fully in your world. And you will help us. Dawn was approaching. I could feel it somehow, despite the absence of windows. The entity seemed to sense it too, growing more urgent. Decide, Daniel. Join us willingly, or be consumed. I stood there, exhausted and terrified, as the house continued its impossible expansion around me. The being extended its hand, now almost fully solid, almost fully human. In that moment, looking into its alien eyes, I made my choice. But dawn broke before I could act on it, and once again, I found myself lying on the living room floor as sunlight streamed through normal windows. The house appeared unchanged. Ordinary. Except when I checked my notebook and measured the hallway again, it was 63 feet long. And on my wrist was a mark I'd never seen before, the same spiral eye symbol that had been carved above the front door. The house had branded me. The transformation was progressing. And night would come again all too soon. I spent the morning in a haze of fear and exhaustion, alternating between convincing myself I was losing my mind and accepting the impossible reality of what was happening. The mark on my wrist pulsed occasionally, a dull throb that seemed to sync with the creaking of the house. My rational mind, the architect in me, demanded evidence. I took photos of the hallway with a measuring tape clearly showing 63 feet. I documented the mark on my wrist. I even went outside to measure the exterior of the house, 74 feet long, which meant the interior hallway alone was approaching the physical impossibility threshold. But most telling was what I discovered in the attic. I'd avoided going up there until now, but daylight brought false courage. The pull-down ladder creaked ominously as I climbed, flashlight clutched in my trembling hand. The attic was surprisingly clean, no cobwebs or dust, as if recently maintained. Neat stacks of trunks and boxes lined the walls. I moved toward them, drawn by an inexplicable sense of familiarity. The first trunk contained clothing from various eras, Victorian high collars alongside 70s polyester. The second held toys, a wooden top, tin soldiers, a Rubik's Cube. Items spanning decades, yet all preserved as if new. The third trunk made my blood freeze. Photos. Hundreds of them, showing families, couples, individuals, all former residents, I presumed. But in each photo, standing in the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was a blurred figure. The same translucent entity I'd encountered. And among these photos were pictures of me. Recent ones. Me unlocking the front door for the first time. Me sleeping in my bed upstairs. Me measuring the hallway yesterday. Photos I had no memory of anyone taking. But the true horror lay at the bottom of the trunk, architectural drawings. My architectural drawings. Designs I'd created over the years but never shared, experimental spaces that defied conventional physics, rooms that seemed to fold in on themselves, corridors that created impossible connections. Next to these were much older drawings on yellowed paper, signed by Thomas Westlake. They mirrored mine in concept and execution, despite being created over a century earlier. It wasn't coincidence that had brought me to this house. I'd been led here. Chosen. I was about to close the trunk when I noticed something else, a small leather-bound book wedged in the corner. A journal. The first entry was dated 1897. Today we begin the great work. The order believes I am merely building a house, but I am creating a doorway. The geometries have been calculated precisely. When aligned properly, during the convergence, the boundaries will dissolve. What lies beyond will finally be accessible. The entries continued, detailing Westlake's increasing obsession and apparent success. March 15, 1898, first contact established. They speak through the walls now. Ellen thinks I'm working too hard, hearing things. If only she knew. July 2nd, 1898, the east wing expanded by 11 feet during last night's ritual. Impossible by conventional physics, yet I measured it myself. They are helping me. Guiding my hand. October 31st, 1898, tragedy. Ellen discovered my work in the basement. She threatened to contact authorities, claimed I was tampering with forces beyond comprehension. She doesn't understand the glory of what we're creating. I had to stop her. The entities suggested a solution. Her essence now strengthens the eastern wall. Her sacrifice will not be in vain. I slammed the book shut, nauseated. Westlake hadn't just built this house, he'd turned it into a living entity, one capable of absorbing human energy. And his wife had been the first victim. The final entries were increasingly erratic, the handwriting deteriorating. They promised transcendence, but I fear deception. The house hungers constantly now. I can no longer control the transformations. Last night, my bedroom became an abyss. Williams disappeared into the crawl space. I heard his screams for hours. I must end this before. The entry cut off mid-sentence. The remaining pages were blank. I returned everything to the trunk with shaking hands, then noticed something I overlooked, a small door in the far corner of the attic, barely 3 feet high. It hadn't been there when I entered. The house was changing even in daylight now. I scrambled down the ladder and locked myself in the kitchen, the most normal feeling room in the house. I tried calling the real estate agent, Mrs. Henderson, but the line was disconnected. When I looked up the agency online, it didn't exist. By afternoon, I'd resolved to leave. Whatever connection existed between me and this house, whatever role the entities wanted me to play, I wanted no part of it. I threw essential belongings into a suitcase and headed for the front door. It wouldn't open. The knob turned, the deadbolt slid back, but the door itself seemed fused to the frame. The windows were the same, glass that felt more like steel when I tried to break it. As the sun began its descent, new changes manifested. The kitchen cabinets rearranged themselves while I watched, wood flowing like liquid before re-solidifying in new configurations. The refrigerator's interior revealed not food but a small, dimly lit room where a figure sat huddled in the corner. I slammed it shut and backed away. The mark on my wrist burned hotter. With escape impossible, I barricaded myself in the master bedroom, pushing a heavy dresser against the door. I set up my phone to record and placed a chair in the center of the room, determined to document whatever happened next. As darkness fell, the transformation accelerated. The walls began to breathe, subtle at first, then unmistakable expansions and contractions, like the chest of a sleeping giant. The ceiling rose higher, then higher still, until it disappeared into shadow. The dimensions of the room stretched in impossible ways, corners folding into geometries that hurt my eyes to look at. From the walls came whispers, not just the entity from before, but a chorus of voices. Pleading, threatening, enticing. Join us, Daniel. Help us cross over. Your designs are the key. We're so close now. The dresser barricading the door melted into the floor. The door itself stretched and widened until it was twice its normal size, then swung open of its own accord. Beyond it was not the hallway, but a vast, cathedral-like space that couldn't possibly fit within the house. Floating in the center were my architectural drawings, not the physical papers, but three-dimensional manifestations of my designs. Impossible buildings rotating slowly in midair, forming and reforming. The translucent figures from the night before emerged from various points around this impossible space. There were dozens now, each taking on more definition, more solidity. At their center was the leader, now appearing almost completely human except for eyes that reflected light like a cat's. The convergence approaches, it said, its voice resonating through the expanding space. The final transformation. Your designs will bridge our worlds completely. What are you? I asked, my voice small in the vastness. We are the dwellers in between. Neither fully here nor there. Thomas Westlake opened the door, but couldn't complete the transition. Others have tried and failed. But you understand the geometry of in-between spaces. Your mind works like ours. The figure gestured, and suddenly I was surrounded by more of my designs, not just those I'd drawn, but ideas I'd only ever conceptualized. Buildings that folded space, rooms that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. You've been preparing for this your entire life, Daniel. Your fascination with impossible architecture wasn't random. We've been guiding you, shaping your thoughts, your career, leading you here. A cold realization washed over me. The dreams, the ideas that seemed to come from nowhere. Yes. And now, the final step. Complete the transformation. Make the house a permanent gateway. Another figure floated forward, this one taking the shape of a woman in Victorian dress. Ellen Westlake, I presumed. Her form was more defined than the others, her expression sorrowful. He will consume you, as Thomas consumed me, she said, her voice a hollow echo. The house requires sacrifice to maintain the bridge. The leader hissed, and Ellen's form dissipated like smoke. Lies. We offer transcendence, Daniel. Power beyond human comprehension. Your consciousness expanded across dimensions. As if to demonstrate, the room shifted again. The walls became transparent, revealing landscapes that couldn't exist in our reality, cities built from crystalline structures that pulsed with inner light, forests where vegetation moved with apparent sentience, vast oceans with impossible colors swirling beneath their surfaces. All this could be accessible to you, to humanity, a new frontier of existence. It was beautiful, terrifying, but beautiful. Part of me, the architect, the dreamer, was enthralled. The possibilities for creation, for exploration. But Ellen's warning echoed in my mind. And the bones in the basement. The desperate journal entries of previous occupants. How many? I asked. How many people have you consumed to maintain this house? The entity's expression darkened. Sacrifices were necessary. The bridge requires energy, human energy, to remain stable. But with your help, with the proper design, it could become self-sustaining. And if I refuse? The beautiful vistas vanished, replaced by darkness. The temperature plummeted. Ice formed on every surface, including my skin. Then you joined the others. Your energy absorbed, your consciousness fragmented. The entity's form grew larger, less human. The house will consume you either way, Daniel. The only choice is whether you maintain yourself or become part of its foundation. To emphasize its point, the floor beneath me turned transparent. I could see down through multiple levels of the house, all the way to the basement, now filled with partially formed human figures, their faces frozen in expressions of agony as they melded with the structure itself. Hands reached upward, mouths opened in silent screams. I recognized some of them from the photos in the attic. This is monstrous, I whispered. This is evolution, the entity corrected. The merging of dimensions requires sacrifice. But the outcome will transform reality itself. It extended a hand toward me. Join us willingly. Complete the design. Or join them. It gestured toward the suffering souls below. The mark on my wrist burned white hot. I looked down to see the spiralized symbol glowing, pulsing in rhythm with the house's movements. The entity approached, now fully solid and human in appearance except for those reflective eyes. It placed a cold hand on my shoulder. You know this is your destiny, Daniel. You've always known. Since childhood, you felt that reality as others perceive it was insufficient, limited. You sought to create spaces that transcend those limitations. Now you can. And it was right. I had always been fascinated by impossible architecture, by spaces that challenged perception. My divorce, my career struggles, they'd stemmed partly from an inability to conform to conventional expectations. The entity sensed my wavering resolve. It smiled, an expression both beautiful and terrible. "Look," it said, gesturing to where my designs still floated. "See what we can create together." The drawings began to combine, to evolve beyond anything I conceived. They formed a structure of breathtaking complexity and beauty, a building that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, that folded space around itself like origami. "The ultimate architecture," the entity whispered. "A structure that bridges worlds. And you would be its master builder." My resistance was crumbling. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but another part, a deeper, older part, recognized truth in the entity's words. I had always sensed there was more to reality than what we could perceive, had always tried to express that through my designs. The entity's hand was still on my shoulder, cold yet oddly comforting. The spiral mark on my wrist pulsed in sync with the house's breathing. What exactly would I need to do? I asked, my voice barely audible. The entity's smile widened. "Complete the transformation. Finalize the design that Thomas began. Your blood, marked as you are now, combined with your architectural vision, will solidify the bridge permanently." My blood? A small sacrifice for transcendence. From somewhere deep in the house came Ellen Westlake's voice again, fainter but insistent. "It will take all of you, Daniel. Not just your blood. Your essence. Your soul." The leader made a dismissive gesture, and her voice was silenced. I stepped back from the entity's touch. I need time. To think. To understand. The entity's expression hardened momentarily, then softened into false benevolence. "Of course. But time moves differently as the convergence approaches. You have until tomorrow night. Then the window closes for another century." With that, the vast cathedral space contracted. The floating designs collapsed. The entities receded into the walls, the floors, the very air, not gone, but waiting. Watching. I found myself back in my bedroom, which had returned to its normal proportions. The digital clock beside my bed read 3:33 a.m. Outside, the night was silent except for the occasional hoot of an owl. But the house still felt alive around me. Listening. And the mark on my wrist continued to pulse gently. I didn't sleep. Instead, I pored over what I found in the attic, particularly Westlake's journal. The final pages I hadn't read earlier revealed his growing terror as the house's transformations accelerated beyond his control. April 17, 1899, the entities speak constantly now. They no longer need the ritual to manifest. The house expands every night, rooms appear where none existed, doors open to impossible spaces. 3 more workers disappeared yesterday. I hear their screams in the walls. April 20th, 1899, they lied to me. This was never about transcendence or evolution. They are parasites, feeding on human consciousness. The house is their trap, their feeding ground. God forgive me for what I've created. April 21st, 1899, I've sent everyone away. Tonight I will attempt to seal the bridge once and for all. The entities are furious. They've shown me visions of what they'll do if I proceed, torments beyond human comprehension. But I must try. The blood that opened the door may also close it. The final entry was a hasty scrawl. They're coming. If anyone finds this, burn the house. It's the only way to destroy the bridge completely. Fire purifies. Fire ends. Fire. Again, the entry ended abruptly. Thomas Westlake had disappeared in 1899, his body never found. Now I understood why. As dawn broke, I made my decision. I wouldn't help complete their bridge, but I also couldn't let this house remain to trap others. Westlake's final words echoed in my mind. Fire purifies. Fire ends. I spent the morning gathering supplies from town, gasoline, matches, road flares. The hardware store owner gave me odd looks but asked no questions. Back at the house, I methodically prepared, placing accelerants at strategic points throughout the structure. If I couldn't escape, I would destroy the house with me inside it. Better than becoming part of its living architecture, another consciousness trapped in eternal torment. As I worked, the house seemed to sense my intentions. Subtle at first, doors that wouldn't stay open, items disappearing when I set them down, lights flickering ominously. By afternoon, the resistance had grown more aggressive. A window slammed shut on my hand as I tried to open it, nearly breaking my fingers. A floorboard buckled suddenly, sending me sprawling. The temperature dropped to near freezing despite the summer heat outside. The entities began to manifest earlier than before, translucent shapes moving through walls, gathering in corners, watching. Their whispers grew more urgent, more threatening. You betray us, Daniel. You cannot destroy what exists between dimensions. The fire will only trap you with us forever. I ignored them, continuing my preparations. The mark on my wrist burned painfully now, the spiral pattern spreading up my arm like infected veins. As sunset approached, I made my final arrangements. I would wait until the transformation was fully underway, when the house had expanded to its maximum extent and the entities were fully manifested, then ignite the accelerants. If Westlake was right, fire could destroy the bridge between worlds. But the house had other plans. At precisely sunset, before I could position myself for the final act, every door and window in the house slammed shut simultaneously. The air became thick, difficult to breathe. The dimensions began to shift more radically than ever before, walls curving inward, the ceiling swirling like a vortex, the floor becoming transparent in patches to reveal that impossible abyss below. The leader of the entities materialized before me, no longer bothering with human pretense. Its true form was a shifting mass of angles and curves that hurt to look at directly, with those same reflective eyes floating within the chaos. Did you think we wouldn't know? Its voice resonated painfully in my skull. Did you think the house wouldn't tell us? The gasoline cans I positioned throughout the house levitated into the air, their contents draining away into nothingness. Thomas tried the same desperate measure. His remains are part of the foundation now. The entity surged forward, enveloping me in cold darkness. I felt my consciousness being invaded, memories sifted through, thoughts examined and discarded. The pain was excruciating, like ice picks behind my eyes. You will join us, Daniel. Willingly or not. I fought back with the only weapon I had left, my mind. My architectural knowledge. If their bridge relied on specific geometric principles, perhaps it could be disrupted by opposing concepts. I focused intently, visualizing anti-structures, designs that would collapse inward, that would create instability rather than transcendence. I pictured load-bearing elements failing, supports buckling, foundations crumbling. The entity recoiled as if struck. What are you doing? The house shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in the walls, not from physical stress but from conceptual contradiction. The impossible cathedral space began to warp, angles that had bent outward now collapsing inward. Stop, the entity shrieked. You'll destroy everything, including yourself. But I continued, pushing harder. If I couldn't burn the bridge, perhaps I could collapse it. I focused on every principle of architectural failure I knew: resonant frequencies that shattered glass, harmonic vibrations that toppled bridges, spatial configurations that created structural weakness. The house's transformation began to reverse. Expanded spaces contracted painfully. Impossible geometries simplified. The entities wailed as their forms destabilized, becoming less solid, more fragmented. The leader made a final desperate lunge toward me, its form billowing like smoke. "If we are undone, you will be undone with us." Its cold essence penetrated my chest, clutching at something deep within me, my consciousness, my soul. I felt myself being pulled apart, fragmenting like the house around me. In that moment of desperation, I reached for the one tool I had left, a road flare I kept in my pocket. With the last of my strength, I struck it against the floor. The flare ignited, blazing with chemical fire. I plunged it into the center of the entity even as it tried to absorb me. Light and heat exploded outward. The entity shrieked, a sound beyond sound that shattered windows and splintered wood. Fire spread impossibly fast, following the entity as it tried to retreat, consuming its essence. The house convulsed. Walls collapsed inward. The ceiling descended like a falling sky. I was thrown to the floor as reality itself seemed to fold and compress around me. The last thing I saw before consciousness fled was the spiral mark on my wrist burning away, consumed by purifying flame. I should have died in that house. By all rights, I should have been crushed by falling debris or consumed by the flames that devoured the structure with supernatural hunger. Yet somehow, I survived. I woke in Black River Community Hospital 3 days later. According to the doctors, I'd been found unconscious on the front lawn of Westlake House as it burned to the ground. No one could explain how I escaped the inferno unscathed. No burns, no smoke inhalation, just a deep exhaustion that had kept me unconscious. The official report ruled it an accident, faulty wiring in an old house. The locals knew better. I could see it in their eyes when they visited, Eleanor from the diner bringing homemade soup, Henry from the library with books to pass the time. They never asked questions, but their sidelong glances spoke volumes. Another victim of Westlake House. Another lucky survivor. But had I truly survived? That question haunted me as I recovered. The spiral mark had vanished from my wrist, leaving unmarked skin. The house was gone, reduced to charred timber and ash. Yet something remained, a lingering connection I couldn't quite define. I dreamed of impossible architecture every night. Not nightmares, exactly, but disorienting visions of spaces that folded in on themselves, of doorways leading to alien vistas. I would wake sweating, convinced for a moment that my hospital room had expanded to cathedral proportions. Dr. Marlowe, the attending physician, attributed it to trauma. The mind processes shock in strange ways, she explained while checking my vitals. Give it time. But time didn't help. If anything, the dreams grew more vivid, more detailed. I began sketching them, complex structures that defied physics, rooms that connected in ways that shouldn't be possible. The staff grew concerned, but I assured them it was therapeutic. Just an architect processing trauma through his craft. I was released after a week, with nowhere to go. My belongings had been destroyed in the fire. The insurance company was still processing my claim. I took a room at the Mountain View Inn on the edge of town, a quaint 2-story motel with a view of the forests beyond. The first night there, I discovered that the dreams weren't confined to sleep anymore. I was showering when it happened, the bathroom subtly expanded, the walls breathing outward. The mirror fogged not with steam but with condensation that formed words, "We remain." I stumbled out in panic, wrapping myself in a towel. By the time I returned with the motel manager, the bathroom had returned to normal dimensions. The mirror showed only my pale, frightened face. Probably just exhaustion, the manager suggested kindly. After what you've been through. But I knew better. The bridge hadn't been destroyed, merely damaged. The connection hadn't been severed, merely weakened. They were still out there, in the spaces between. And somehow, I was still linked to them. I sought out Henry at the library, hoping his knowledge of local history might provide answers. We met after hours, when we could speak freely. The Order of the Eternal Threshold believed certain individuals could serve as living anchors, he explained, showing me obscure texts he gathered. People with the right perspective, the right mental architecture. Even if their physical creation was destroyed, the anchor could maintain a tether. You're saying I'm still connected to those entities? Even with the house gone? Henry removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The house was never the point, Daniel. It was a tool, a physical manifestation of the bridge. But the real connection was always more metaphysical. How do I sever it completely? He hesitated. The texts are unclear. Some suggest the anchor must be removed. You mean killed. Others indicate a possibility of transfer, finding another suitable anchor to take your place. I left the library with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of dread. That night, in my motel room, I felt them reaching for me across the dimensional gulf, entities of cold intelligence and hungry purpose. The room expanded around midnight. Walls receded. The ceiling vanished into shadow. From this newly created space emerged a figure, not the leader, but Ellen Westlake, her form more solid than before. He's weakened, she said without preamble. The fire damaged his connection to this reality. But he's rebuilding through you. How do I stop it? I asked, surprised by my own calmness. Thomas tried to seal the breach with his own blood, the blood that opened it. He failed because his connection had grown too strong. Yours is still new, still malleable. What are you suggesting? Ellen's form wavered. There's a place where the veil remains thin, where Thomas conducted his original ritual. The foundation stones of Westlake House. They survived the fire. If you can reach that spot at the convergence tonight, you might be able to sever your connection completely. Why are you helping me? Her expression turned sorrowful. I was the first sacrifice. My essence has been bound to that place for over a century. If the bridge collapses completely, perhaps I can finally move on. She began to fade, her form dissolving into mist. Hurry. He knows I'm here. He'll try to stop you. After she vanished, the room returned to normal dimensions. I sat on the edge of the bed, mind racing. Could I trust her? The entities had proven deceptive before. But what choice did I have? I dressed quickly and slipped out of the motel. The ruins of Westlake House lay on the outskirts of town, cordoned off with police tape but otherwise unguarded. The night was moonless, providing cover as I made my way across the charred remains. The foundation stones Ellen had mentioned were still intact, massive granite blocks arranged in a perfect circle at what had been the center of the house. Even in the darkness, I could make out symbols carved into their surfaces, spirals, eyes, geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed peripherally. As I approached, the air grew cold. My breath fogged before me. The silence deepened, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I stepped into the circle of stones and immediately felt it, a vibration, subtle at first, then growing stronger. The ground seemed to pulse beneath my feet. The stones began to emit a faint bluish light, illuminating the ruins around me. From the shadows beyond the circle came a familiar voice. "She's deceiving you, Daniel." The leader of the entities materialized, less defined than before, parts of its form shifting and distorting like poor reception on an old television. The fire had weakened it, just as Ellen had said. Ellen doesn't seek freedom, she wants what I promised her husband. Transcendence. Power. She believes she can take my place if I'm weakened further. Why should I believe you? Because I offer honesty now. The deception failed. Force failed. All that remains is truth. The entity's form stabilized slightly. Yes, I sought to use you, to feed on this world through the bridge you would complete. But now I offer a genuine exchange, knowledge for freedom. What knowledge? The secrets of architecture that transcends dimensions. Designs that could revolutionize your world. In exchange, you release your connection to me, not severing it completely, but transferring enough that I can sustain a minimal presence without further expansion. It was tempting. The architect in me hungered for such knowledge, concepts beyond human understanding that could transform my field, my career, my legacy. But before I could respond, Ellen reappeared, her form brighter, more solid than before. "Don't listen," she urged. "He's desperate. Weakened. This is our chance to end this permanently." The entity hissed. "Our chance? You betray yourself, Ellen." She turned to me, expression hardening. "Very well. The truth, then. Yes, I want freedom from my prison. But I also want what should have been mine, the power Thomas sought to keep for himself. With the entity weakened and your connection intact, the energy could flow to me instead. You're both using me, I realized aloud. Of course, the entity said. Did you expect altruism from beings like us? But my offer stands, knowledge in exchange for a controlled connection. Ellen moved closer. And mine, help me absorb what remains of his power, and I'll ensure your connection is severed completely. You'll be free. I stood between them in the glowing circle, the foundation stones pulsing more intensely now. The convergence was approaching, the moment when the veil between dimensions would be thinnest. My mind raced. Neither could be trusted. Both would use me if given the chance. But perhaps that knowledge itself was a weapon. The stones reached peak luminescence. The air crackled with energy. The moment had arrived. I made my decision. With deliberate movements, I removed a pocket knife, the one possession I had on me during the fire. I pressed the blade to my palm and cut deeply, allowing blood to flow onto the central foundation stone. I reject you both, I declared. I stand as neither anchor nor conduit. My consciousness is my own. The entity lunged forward. No. Ellen did the same from the opposite direction. You fool. But as my blood touched the stone, something unexpected happened. Rather than flowing outward, the energy began to flow inward, into me. Knowledge flooded my mind, architectural concepts beyond human comprehension, spatial relationships that defied Euclidean geometry, structures that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The entity and Ellen both screamed as they were pulled toward me, not to possess, but to be absorbed. The bridge was inverting, the flow reversing. What have you done? The entity shrieked as its form began to disintegrate. I hadn't planned this, couldn't have known it would happen. but some instinct had guided my actions. If I couldn't sever the connection, perhaps I could control it instead, become not the bridge itself, but its gatekeeper. The foundation stones shattered. The ground beneath me collapsed. I fell through darkness, through cold so intense it burned, through spaces between spaces. When I regained consciousness, I was lying in the pit where Westlake House had stood, surrounded by shattered stone. Dawn was breaking. Birds chirped innocently in nearby trees. I climbed out, brushing dirt from my clothes. I felt different. Expanded somehow, yet more centered than before. The knowledge I absorbed integrated into my consciousness, not overwhelming me, but enhancing my perception. I could see it now, the thin places where dimensions overlapped, the subtle geometries that defined reality itself. Not hallucinations or manifestations, just a deeper level of perception that had always existed beyond human awareness. I returned to the motel, packed my few belongings, and checked out. The manager asked where I was headed. Not sure yet, I answered honestly. I need to build something. In the months that followed, I traveled across the country, seeking locations with the right properties, places where reality was naturally more malleable. I sketched constantly, developing designs that incorporated what I'd learned, structures that could harmonize dimensional energies rather than exploiting them. Sometimes, in dreams, I still heard them, Ellen and the entity, now diminished to mere echoes within my consciousness. No longer threatening, no longer controlling. Just perspectives from beyond, integrated into my expanded awareness. I eventually settled in a remote area of the Pacific Northwest, where I began construction on my first project, a small cabin designed with principles that no architectural school taught. Not a bridge between worlds, but a harmony of them. A space where dimensions could coexist without parasitism or destruction. As I worked, I sometimes felt the house around me subtly shift, walls breathing, spaces expanding. But now these changes didn't frighten me. They responded to my will, my design, my understanding of the spaces between. The transformation continued, but now I controlled it. Now I was its master. And sometimes, when twilight blurred the boundaries of perception, I would sit on my porch and look out at the forest, seeing not just trees and shadows, but glimpses of what lay beyond. Other worlds, other possibilities, other dimensions. Not a threat. Not a trap. Just the true nature of reality, finally visible to eyes that had learned to see. 6 months had passed since the destruction of Westlake House. Winter had settled over the Pacific Northwest, blanketing my property in pristine snow that reflected the moonlight with an almost supernatural luminescence. My cabin stood in peaceful harmony with the surrounding forest, a structure that appeared modest from the outside but contained spaces that defied conventional understanding. I had named it Threshold House. Not as grandiose as Westlake's creation, but more balanced, more controlled. A place where dimensional energies flowed without friction or disruption. To casual observers, the occasional hiker who stumbled upon my property, the delivery person who brought supplies twice monthly, it appeared to be a simple, if unusually designed, woodland retreat. They couldn't see how the interior spaces folded into themselves, creating rooms that existed partially in adjacent dimensions. They couldn't perceive how the central atrium sometimes opened to vistas of worlds beyond our own. I had learned to control these manifestations, to maintain the balance between realities. The knowledge I'd absorbed from the entities had integrated fully with my architectural training, creating a synthesis that was neither fully human nor entirely alien. Most nights were peaceful now. The entities within my consciousness had been reduced to whispers, Ellen occasionally offering insights into the nature of interdimensional spaces, the leader, now diminished to a fragment of its former self, grudgingly providing technical knowledge when needed. But tonight was different. The winter solstice, when the veil between dimensions naturally thinned. As darkness fell, I felt the familiar pressure building. Threshold House responded, walls subtly expanding, ceilings rising. The fireplace burned with flames that occasionally shifted to colors beyond the normal spectrum. I sat in my study, sketching designs for my next project, a structure that would further refine my understanding of harmonious dimensional intersection. The pencil moved almost of its own accord, guided by knowledge that transcended conventional physics. A knock at the front door broke my concentration. This was unusual. I had no visitors scheduled, and my remote location discouraged casual drop-ins, especially on a winter night with snow falling heavily. Cautiously, I approached the door. Through the window beside it, I could see a figure standing on the porch, a woman bundled in a heavy coat, stamping her feet against the cold. I opened the door, instantly alert to any dimensional disturbance. But she appeared fully human, fully present in this reality. "Daniel Mercer?" she asked, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "Yes," I confirmed, studying her carefully. Mid-30s, shoulder-length auburn hair, intelligent eyes that held exhaustion and something else, determination, perhaps. Or desperation. "My name is Olivia Reinhardt. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I need to speak with you about Westlake House." My body tensed. Few people knew of my connection to that place. I had deliberately maintained a low profile since moving here. "How did you find me?" With considerable difficulty, she admitted. "May I come in? It's rather cold out here." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. As she entered, I observed her reaction carefully. Most people experienced a momentary disorientation upon first entering Threshold House, a subtle vertigo as their minds processed spaces that didn't quite align with external appearances. Olivia paused, blinking rapidly. "Interesting design," she commented, her gaze traveling up to the ceiling that seemed to recede further than the exterior dimensions should allow. I led her to the living room, where the fireplace cast dancing shadows. "What's your interest in Westlake House?" I asked, remaining standing while she took a seat on the sofa. "I'm researching architectural anomalies across New England," she explained, removing her gloves. "Structures that exhibit unusual properties." Westlake House was at the top of my list, but by the time I reached Black River, it had already burned down. "A tragic accident," I said neutrally. "Was it?" She fixed me with a penetrating stare. "The locals speak of you in whispers, Mr. Mercer. The only person to survive the house's latest hunger, they call it." I remained silent, evaluating. She could be a journalist seeking a sensational story. Or something more concerning, someone who understood more than she should about the spaces between. "What exactly is your research for, Ms. Reinhardt?" "My doctoral dissertation initially. Princeton University, Department of Theoretical Architecture and Applied Physics. But it's become something more personal." She hesitated, then reached into her bag and withdrew a leather-bound journal. My breath caught. It was identical to Thomas Westlake's journal that had burned in the fire. "This belonged to my great-grandfather, Edward Reinhardt," she continued. "He was a member of the Order of the Eternal Threshold alongside Thomas Westlake. While Thomas focused on creating a physical bridge between dimensions, Edward was more interested in the theoretical aspects, the mathematics of interdimensional spaces, the geometry of reality folding." She opened the journal, revealing diagrams that were eerily similar to my recent sketches. Edward believed Westlake's approach was dangerous, creating a permanent bridge without proper controls. He advocated instead for what he called managed permeability, structures that could facilitate dimensional interaction without risk of invasion or collapse. I studied her more carefully. There was no sign of deception in her eyes, no hint of the cold intelligence that had characterized the entities from Westlake House. If anything, she appeared genuinely passionate about the subject. "Why come to me?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Because you're doing exactly what Edward theorized." She gestured around at my own. "This structure, I can feel it. The spaces aren't quite right, but not in a threatening way. It's harmonious, controlled." I sat down across from her, suddenly weary. "And if I am? What then?" "I want to learn from you." Her expression was earnest. The order fragmented after Westlake's disappearance. Most members abandoned their research, frightened by what had happened. But Edward continued his theoretical work in secret, passing his knowledge to my grandmother, who passed it to my mother, who eventually shared it with me. She leaned forward. "I've spent my adult life trying to understand concepts that most academics dismiss as fantasy. Finding you, someone who has not only grasped these principles but implemented them, is beyond valuable to me." I considered her request carefully. Since absorbing the entity's knowledge, I had deliberately isolated myself, afraid of the potential consequences of sharing what I had learned. The power to manipulate dimensional boundaries could be catastrophic in the wrong hands. Yet looking at Olivia, her obvious intelligence, her family connection to this knowledge, her sincere enthusiasm, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: kinship. Someone who might actually understand what I had experienced and what I was creating. Before I could respond, the house shuddered. The walls rippled visibly. The fire flared blue-green momentarily. "What was that?" Olivia asked, alarmed but not panicking. "The solstice," I explained. "Dimensional boundaries are naturally thinner tonight. The house responds to these fluctuations." Another, stronger tremor shook the structure. Pictures rattled on walls. A vase toppled from a shelf, shattering on the floor. This was unusual. I had designed Threshold House specifically to accommodate solstice fluctuations without disruption. Unless... Did you bring anything else from your great-grandfather's collection? I asked urgently. Besides the journal? Olivia's expression shifted to concern. Yes, actually. A stone artifact Edward recovered from Westlake's study after his disappearance. I thought it might help convince you of my authentic interest. She reached into her bag again and withdrew a small object wrapped in cloth. As she unveiled it, I felt a surge of energy through the house and through me. It was a stone cube, approximately 3 inches on each side, covered in the same spiralized symbols that had marked Westlake House. In the firelight, it seemed to pulse with inner luminescence. "Put it back," I ordered sharply. "Wrap it up. Now." But it was too late. The cube levitated from her palm, hovering between us. The air around it distorted, like heat waves above hot asphalt. I felt them stirring within me, the entities, previously reduced to whispers, now gaining strength. Ellen's presence sharpened first, the keystone. The final component Thomas hid from us. The leader's fragment followed, its voice stronger than it had been in months. The convergence circuit can be completed now. The bridge rebuilt. What's happening? Olivia gasped, backing away from the floating cube. The house was transforming more dramatically now, walls expanding rapidly, ceiling disappearing into shadow, floors becoming translucent to reveal swirling dimensional mists beneath. The fireplace elongated into a towering archway through which alien landscapes flickered. The cube is a catalyst, I explained, fighting to maintain control as the entities within me struggle for dominance. Westlake created it as the keystone for his bridge. Your great-grandfather must have removed it after Thomas disappeared, preventing the complete manifestation. But you destroyed the bridge, Olivia said, confusion evident in her voice. The house burned. I damaged it. Weakened the connection. But with this, I gestured to the cube, now spinning faster, emitting pulses of energy that rippled through the structure, and with me as the living anchor, the bridge can be rebuilt. Anywhere. Understanding dawned in her eyes. That's why you built this place. Not just as a controlled environment, but as a potential replacement for Westlake House. Not intentionally, I clarified, grimacing as pain lanced through my head. The entities were growing stronger by the second, feeding on the cube's energy. I created Threshold House to harmonize dimensional energies, not exploit them. But with the keystone, I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. The transformation was accelerating around us. Doorways appeared in walls, opening onto vistas of impossible beauty and terrifying alienness. The floor began to reform into a spiral pattern centered on the floating cube. And within me, the balance of power was shifting. The fragments I had absorbed and controlled for months were coalescing, strengthening, pushing against the boundaries of my consciousness. Olivia moved toward me, clutching her great-grandfather's journal. How do we stop it? We can't stop it entirely, I said, forcing the words out as my mind became a battleground. But we might be able to redirect it. Your great-grandfather's theories manage permeability instead of permanent bridging. That's the key. I staggered to my study, Olivia following close behind. The room had expanded to impossible proportions, my drafting table now positioned at the center of what appeared to be a vast amphitheater. My recent sketches had animated, the designs rotating in three-dimensional projection above the table. Edward believed that instead of a fixed bridge, which would inevitably lead to invasion or collapse, dimensional interactions should be temporally limited and spatially contained, Olivia explained rapidly, flipping through the journal. Controlled openings rather than permanent tears. A valve instead of an open door, I nodded, understanding immediately. But I need the mathematical framework. She found the page she was seeking and laid the journal open on my drafting table. Here. His final theoretical model, a dimensional dampening field that allows controlled, temporary intersections while preventing permanent merging. The equations were complex but beautiful, describing spatial relationships I instinctively understood thanks to the knowledge I'd absorbed. With trembling hands, I began adapting my existing designs, incorporating Edward's theoretical framework into Threshold House's actual structure. As I worked, the entities within me fought harder for control. Ellen's presence became almost physical. I could feel her cold touch on my consciousness, searching for weaknesses. "You're making a mistake," she whispered. "With the keystone, we could achieve true transcendence. No more boundaries. No more limitations." The leader's fragment concurred. "You've only experienced a fraction of what we offer. Complete integration would expand your consciousness beyond human comprehension." I ignored them, focusing on the mathematics, on the architecture. Olivia worked beside me, her academic understanding of the theories complementing my intuitive grasp of their application. The house continued its transformation around us, but now with purpose, responding to our calculations, our intentions. The expanding spaces began to contract in specific patterns. The doorways to other dimensions narrowed, became more defined, more controlled. The cube, still floating and spinning, began to dim slightly as we redirected its energy flow. "It's working," Olivia breathed, watching as the chaotic dimensional bleeding stabilized into discrete, managed connection points. But the entities weren't surrendering easily. With a final surge of desperate strength, they pushed against my mental barriers. Pain exploded behind my eyes. I fell to my knees, fighting to maintain consciousness, to maintain control. "Daniel." Olivia knelt beside me, gripping my shoulders. "Stay with me. Focus." Through the haze of pain, I saw the cube flare brighter again. The hard-won stability began to falter as the entities channeled the cube's power directly. "The keystone," I gasped. "We need to neutralize it." Olivia's eyes widened with realization. Edward's final theory, the cancellation matrix. He theorized that every dimensional catalyst has a corresponding dampening configuration. She flipped frantically through the journal's final pages, finding a diagram, a counterpoint to the spiralized symbol, a pattern that inverted its energy flow. "We need to inscribe this onto the cube," she explained. "It won't destroy it, but it will transform it from a catalyst into a regulator." With shaking hands, I reached for my drafting tools. The entities within me screamed in protest, sending waves of pain through my skull. Ellen's voice became desperate. "You'll trap us forever. This is not salvation." "We need something to carve the pattern," I managed through gritted teeth. "The symbol must be physically inscribed." Olivia frantically searched the study, eventually finding a letter opener with a sharp point. "Will this work?" I nodded, unable to speak as another wave of resistance battered my consciousness. The cube hovered above the drafting table, pulsing with malevolent energy. The house around us continued its transformation, spaces warping and folding in increasingly unstable patterns. Through the windows, I could see the night sky fragmenting, stars being replaced by alien constellations from dimensions beyond. "Hold me steady," I instructed Olivia as she helped me to my feet. "I need to get close enough." Together, we approached the floating cube. The air around it crackled with dimensional energy, making my skin burn and tingle. Olivia held the journal open to the cancellation matrix page, her hand trembling but determined. "The pattern must be precise," she reminded me. "Each line, each curve exactly as shown." I raised the letter opener, fighting against both the physical resistance of the air and the mental assault of the entities. My hand moved with agonizing slowness toward the cube's surface. "No!" Ellen's voice thundered through my mind. We were so close. After all these years. The leader's presence surged forward as well. "You will never be free of us. Never." With a final push of will, I pressed the letter opener against the cube's surface. The stone was unexpectedly soft, almost like clay. I began carving the first line of the cancellation matrix, a curve that opposed the spiral pattern already present. The effect was immediate. The cube emitted a high-pitched whine. Its surface darkened where I carved, as if absorbing light rather than emitting it. The house responded in kind, its wild transformation slowing, some spaces beginning to contract back to normal dimensions. "It's working," Olivia encouraged. "Keep going." Line by line, I carved the pattern, each stroke weakening the cube's power and the entity's hold over me. My mind cleared incrementally as their influence waned. The house stabilized further, the alien doorway shrinking, the impossible spaces folding back into conventional geometry. When I carved the final line, completing the matrix, the cube shuddered violently. For a moment, it glowed with blinding intensity. Then, with a sound like a distant bell, it dropped to the drafting table, inert and ordinary. The house gave one final shudder, then settled. The walls returned to their original positions. The ceiling lowered to its proper height. The fireplace resumed its normal proportions. Within my mind, silence fell. Ellen's presence faded to a whisper, then disappeared entirely. The leader's fragment dissolved, leaving only the knowledge I had absorbed, now fully integrated into my consciousness without the alien influence that had accompanied it. I collapsed into my chair, exhausted but clear-headed for the first time in months. Olivia sat across from me, her face pale but her eyes bright with wonder. "We did it," she said softly. "Edward's theory was correct." I nodded, examining the cube. It appeared ordinary now, a simple stone artifact inscribed with two opposing patterns that created perfect balance. No longer a key to other dimensions, but a lock that kept them properly separated. "What happens now?" Olivia asked after a long silence. I looked around my home, Threshold House, seeing it with new clarity. It was still unique, still incorporated principles of dimensional architecture beyond conventional understanding. But now it was truly what I had intended it to be, a harmony of realities rather than a bridge between them. "Now," I said, "we continue the work properly." The Order of the Eternal Threshold had the right idea but the wrong approach. There's value in understanding the spaces between dimensions, but not enforcing them open permanently. Olivia placed her great-grandfather's journal on the table beside the neutralized cube. Edward would have agreed. He always believed knowledge should serve harmony, not conquest. As dawn broke outside, sunlight streaming through windows that now remained fixed in their proper dimensions, we began to plan. With Olivia's theoretical knowledge and my practical experience, we could develop architectural principles that respected dimensional boundaries while allowing controlled exploration. Not a bridge to other worlds. Not a fortress against them. But a threshold, a carefully managed point of contact that honored the integrity of all realms. In the months that followed, Threshold House became a center for our research. We expanded it methodically, incorporating Edward's theories and my intuitive understanding into a structure that demonstrated true dimensional harmony. Occasionally, during certain astronomical alignments, we would activate the cube briefly, allowing controlled observations of other dimensions without risk of invasion or collapse. Each experiment refined our understanding, each success built upon the last. Word spread quietly in certain academic circles. Select researchers visited, theoreticians, physicists, architects with open minds and ethical principles. A new order formed gradually, dedicated not to exploitation but to understanding. The entities never returned. Whatever consciousness Ellen and the leader had possessed was gone, either destroyed in the final confrontation or relocated beyond our reach. The knowledge remained, but purified of influence, available for constructive use. Sometimes at night, standing on the porch of Threshold House, I would look up at the stars and sense the vastness beyond them, the countless dimensions that intersected with our own. Not with fear, as I once had, but with wonder and respect. "We are not alone in the multiverse," I told Olivia one evening as we watched the aurora borealis ripple across the sky, its patterns occasionally revealing glimpses of other realities. "But we need not be invaders or invaded. We can be neighbors instead, separated by proper boundaries, connecting only through managed thresholds." She took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "An architecture of respect rather than conquest." "Exactly," I agreed. Thomas Westlake built a bridge that invited disaster. Edward Reinhardt theorized a balanced approach but never implemented it. Together, we found the middle path, the threshold point. The cube rested safely in a specially designed chamber beneath the house, its opposing patterns ensuring dimensional stability. The journal's knowledge had been expanded upon, recorded, and shared with trusted colleagues. The work continued, cautious but determined. And Threshold House stood as living proof that understanding the spaces between didn't require surrendering to them, that harmony could exist between what was human and what lay beyond. I had not merely survived Westlake House after all. I had transcended it, transforming its legacy from one of dangerous obsession to enlightened exploration. The threshold remained, controlled, respected, and properly maintained, as it always should have been. Have you ever heard a voice that shouldn't exist? The first time I heard it, I was standing on Morgan's Point Lighthouse, my fingers wrapped around the rusted railing as salt spray kissed my face. The October wind carried that whisper, faint but unmistakable, a human voice calling from somewhere beyond the violent waves below. A voice where no person could possibly be. My name is Eleanor Pierce, and I've been the lighthouse keeper at Morgan's Point for nearly 3 years now. Most would call this a lonely existence, but I've always preferred solitude to the complications of city life. The locals in the nearby village of Blackwater Cove leave me alone, save for monthly supply deliveries and occasional pleasantries. That's precisely how I like it. The lighthouse stands on a rocky outcrop, separated from the mainland by a narrow causeway that disappears during high tide. My home is a 2-story stone cottage attached to the tower itself, sturdy walls that have withstood a century of Atlantic fury. Inside, it's sparse but comfortable, wooden floors worn smooth by generations of keepers' footsteps, a modest kitchen, a small library filled with books I've read dozens of times, and upstairs, my bedroom with windows facing the endless ocean. That evening began like any other. I had just finished my routine maintenance check when I noticed the barometer dropping rapidly. The radio confirmed what I already suspected. A powerful nor'easter was approaching, earlier than forecasted. The sky darkened prematurely, clouds swelling and darkening to the color of bruised plums. I secured the shutters and double-checked the generator when something made me pause. A strange scent carried on the wind, not the typical brine and seaweed, but something sweeter, almost like wood burning. I dismissed it as my imagination and continued preparations. The first raindrops fell as I climbed the spiral staircase to light the beacon. Each step creaked under my weight, a familiar symphony I barely noticed anymore. But tonight, the creaks seemed to linger longer than they should, as if the wood was settling after someone else's footsteps. I glanced behind me twice, seeing nothing but shadows stretching in the beam of my flashlight. By nightfall, the storm had become a roaring beast. Waves crashed against the rocks below with such force that the entire structure trembled. Rain lashed horizontally against the windows, and wind howled through every crack and crevice of the old building. I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and a worn copy of Moby Dick, listening to the chaos outside. That's when I first felt it, a subtle shift in air pressure, as if someone had opened and quickly closed a door. My ears popped slightly. The flames in the fireplace flickered violently, then steadied. I set my book down, listening intently. "Hello?" I called out, feeling immediately foolish. Of course, no one was there. No one could reach the lighthouse in this weather. The causeway would be completely submerged. A gust of wind rattled the windows with unusual force. Then came a sound I couldn't immediately identify, a rhythmic tapping, like knuckles on glass. I followed the noise to the kitchen window, but the shutters were closed tight. The tapping continued, seemingly moving around the house from window to window. Rain, I assured myself. Just branches or debris blowing against the cottage. Yet we had no trees this close to the lighthouse, and the tapping had a deliberate quality to it. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. I retreated to the living room, adding another log to the fire. The wind's pitch changed, becoming a low moan that sounded disturbingly like my name being drawn out, Eleanor. My rational mind blamed the storm and my isolation. 3 years alone would make anyone's imagination overactive. Still, I found myself checking the locks on all the doors. As I approached the entrance to the tower, I noticed water seeping under the door, not unusual during heavy storms. But this water was different. Instead of clear rainwater, it had a faint reddish tinge. Rust from the metal door frame, I reasoned, kneeling to touch it. The liquid felt oddly warm against my fingertips. When I pulled my hand back, the substance seemed thicker than water, more viscous. I hurried to the sink to wash it off, heart pounding unreasonably fast. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The radio emitted a burst of static that made me jump. Through the crackling, I thought I heard a voice, faint, desperate, saying something I couldn't quite make out. I adjusted the dial, seeking better reception. More static, then suddenly clear as day. Help us. Please. We're lost. I froze. This wasn't a regular broadcast. The voice sounded waterlogged, distant, yet somehow right beside my ear. Before I could respond, the radio went dead. Outside, the storm intensified. I checked the time, 11:47. The beacon needed inspection to ensure it remained operational through the night. Despite growing unease, I knew my duty. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight. At the tower door, I hesitated, remembering the strange liquid. It had disappeared, the floor now completely dry. Shaking my head at my own nervousness, I unlocked the heavy door and stepped into the tower. The spiral staircase stretched upward into darkness. My flashlight beam barely penetrated the gloom as I began to climb. The familiar creak of each step now sounded like words. 19 steps up, I stopped abruptly. A cold draft brushed against my face, impossible, since there were no windows or openings on this section of the stairwell. The air felt charged, as if during a lightning storm. My flashlight dimmed, then brightened again. 27 steps up, I heard it clearly, footsteps above me, descending. Is someone there? My voice sounded small against the howling wind. No answer, but the footsteps continued. Slow, deliberate, growing closer. My flashlight beam trembled as my hand began to shake. I should turn back, a voice in my head urged. But another part of me needed to know, to see. 36 steps up, my flashlight caught something, a dark smear on the wall. It glistened wetly, trailing downward like something had been dragged against it. Water damage, I told myself, though the consistency looked all wrong. The footsteps stopped. I stopped too, straining to hear over my pounding heart. Nothing but the storm's fury. I continued upward, each step more reluctant than the last. At the top, the door to the lamp room stood ajar, wind and rain slashing through the opening. Impossible, I had closed and locked it earlier. The powerful beacon spun as it should, casting its saving light across the turbulent waters. Rain had pooled on the floor, making it treacherously slippery. I stepped inside, securing the door behind me. The glass enclosure offered a panoramic view of the raging sea and sky merging into infinite blackness. Lightning flashed, illuminating the churning waters below. For an instant, I thought I saw something, a pale shape in the waves near the rocks. The beacon's light swung around, briefly highlighting what looked like an upraised arm. I pressed against the glass, straining to see. Another lightning flash, and there it was again, not one shape but many, pale forms being tossed by the violent sea. Bodies? My mind recoiled from the thought. The beacon light completed another rotation, and I gasped. A face stared back at me through the glass, not from outside where no one could possibly be, but reflected in the glass itself, superimposed over my own reflection. A man's face, gaunt and dripping, eyes dark hollows, lips pulled back in what might have been a grimace or a smile. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. When I looked again, only my terrified reflection stared back. The radio on my belt crackled to life, making me cry out in surprise. "Eleanor," the voice said, "clearer now. We've come back. We've found you." Lightning struck the sea near the lighthouse with a deafening crack. In that brilliant flash, I saw them clearly, dozens of figures in the water, all facing the lighthouse. Facing me. Their arms raised in supplication. The beacon light swung around again, but the figures had vanished. I told myself it was a trick of light, of the storm, of my isolation out of mind. Yet as I hurried back down the spiral staircase, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Something had found its way to Morgan's Point. Something that knew my name. Back in the cottage, I double-locked the tower door, then pushed a heavy cabinet against it for good measure. The storm would pass by morning, I reasoned. Whatever I thought I'd seen would be washed away with it. I was wrong. This was only the beginning. For in the morning light, I would discover the first message carved into the wooden floor beside my bed while I slept. "We are coming ashore." What if the very air around you carried secrets that were never meant to be heard? I woke the next morning to an unnatural stillness. The storm had passed, but in its place hung a fog so dense I could barely see 10 feet beyond my windows. The message carved into my bedroom floor remained, "We are coming ashore," crude letters approximately 3 inches tall, as if etched by a shaking hand or a crude implement. My rational mind sought explanations. Perhaps I had sleepwalked, though I'd never done so before. Maybe the floorboards had always contained these markings, and my frightened mind had only now arranged them into meaningful patterns. Neither explanation felt convincing as I ran my fingers along the grooves, feeling splinters that could only have been made recently. I made coffee with trembling hands, then switched on my radio to contact the mainland. Static answered me. The storm must have damaged the transmission tower. With the fog this thick, I couldn't even see if the causeway was passable yet. I was effectively cut off. A routine check of the lighthouse was mandatory after such severe weather. Despite my reservations about returning to the tower, duty trumped fear. I grabbed my toolkit and approached the cabinet I'd pushed against the door. It had moved, not much, just a few inches away from the wall, but enough to notice. Enough to send ice through my veins. The tower door stood unlocked, though I distinctly remembered securing it the night before. Taking a deep breath, I entered, flashlight sweeping the spiral staircase. Daylight filtered down from above, diluted by fog that had somehow found its way inside. The air felt heavy, almost viscous in my lungs. As I climbed, I noticed something peculiar. Water droplets clung to the wall, typical after a storm of that magnitude. But these droplets defied gravity, forming horizontal patterns that resembled crude letters. I blinked, and they were just ordinary condensation again. The lamp room appeared undamaged. I performed maintenance checks methodically, grateful for the familiar routine. The beacon's glass needed cleaning, salt residue and what looked like handprints smeared its surface. I hadn't touched the glass last night, I was certain of that. While wiping the glass, something on the rocks below caught my eye. The fog had thinned momentarily, revealing what appeared to be driftwood scattered across the jagged stone surface. Pieces of various sizes, some quite large. As I watched, the fog shifted, and I realized with horror that what I'd taken for driftwood were the remains of a boat, splintered planks, torn canvas, twisted metal. The shipwreck wasn't all. Among the debris lay dark shapes that looked disturbingly like bodies. I counted 3 before the fog swallowed them again. My hand jerked to the radio at my belt, ready to call the Coast Guard, when a sudden thought stopped me cold. There had been no distress calls last night. No vessels had reported being in trouble. I needed to investigate. If there were survivors, they would need immediate help. I hurried down the stairs, grabbed my first aid kit and a coil of rope, then made my way down the treacherous path to the rocks below. The fog seemed to part before me, then close immediately behind, isolating me in a bubble of visibility that extended only a few yards in any direction. The temperature had dropped noticeably, my breath forming clouds that joined the enveloping mist. Droplets condensed on my skin, uncomfortably warm, almost like sweat that wasn't my own. Reaching the rocky shore, I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there? Anyone hurt?" My voice sounded muffled, as if the fog itself swallowed the sound. I picked my way carefully across the slippery rocks, following the trail of debris. The shipwreck appeared older than I'd expected, wood darkened and softened by prolonged exposure to water, metal parts corroded beyond recognition. This wasn't from last night's storm. This wreckage had been here much longer. I rounded a large boulder and stopped short. There, arranged in a neat row as if placed deliberately, lay 3 sets of clothing, not modern attire, but what appeared to be naval uniforms from another era. Heavy wool jackets with brass buttons, canvas trousers, leather boots. All empty, as if their owners had simply vanished, leaving their clothes behind. The uniforms were wet but showed signs of extreme age, frayed edges, faded color, patches of mold. I knelt to examine them closer and noticed something tucked into one jacket pocket, a folded piece of paper, somehow intact despite the moisture. With trembling fingers, I carefully unfolded it. It was a ship's manifest dated October 21st, 1872, exactly 153 years ago to the day. The ship's name caught in my throat, the Eleanor May. My namesake. A coincidence that suddenly felt anything but random. The manifest listed 38 crew members. At the bottom, a handwritten note, lost with all hands during the great storm. May God have mercy on their souls. The signature belonged to a keeper, Thomas Pierce. Pierce. My family name. The fog shifted around me, taking on shapes that resembled human figures, tall, short, broad, slight, forming and dissolving like smoke sculptures. A whisper reached my ears, so faint I couldn't be sure if it was real or imagined. We've waited so long. I backed away from the uniforms, nearly slipping on the wet rocks. As I steadied myself, my hand pressed against something that wasn't stone, something yielding yet firm, cold yet strangely warm. I looked down to see a pale hand emerging from a crevice between 2 rocks, fingers curled as if reaching for help. I cried out, stumbling backward. The hand remained unmoving. Forcing myself closer, I recognized it wasn't flesh but some kind of pale driftwood, carved or eroded into the unmistakable shape of a human hand. Yet the detail was incredible: fingernails, knuckle wrinkles, even faint lines that resembled veins. The fog thickened suddenly, reducing visibility to mere inches. I turned to head back to the lighthouse, but in the whiteout, I couldn't determine which direction to go. Panic rose in my chest as I realized I was lost mere yards from my home. "Hello?" I called again, voice cracking. "Can anyone hear me?" "We hear you, Eleanor." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a chorus of whispers that seemed to emanate from the fog itself. "We've always heard you." I spun around, searching for the source. "Who's there?" "Show yourself." The fog parted slightly, revealing a figure about 15 feet away, a man in what appeared to be a captain's uniform, his face obscured by mist. He stood motionless, facing me. "Who are you?" My voice had diminished to a whisper. The figure didn't respond, but slowly raised an arm, pointing not at me but behind me. I turned to follow his gesture and saw the lighthouse tower emerging from the fog, much closer than I thought. Relief flooded me until I realized something was wrong with the image. The lighthouse appeared different, newer, its stone a lighter color, the lamp room a different shape. I blinked, and the vision corrected itself. My familiar lighthouse stood as it always had. When I looked back, the captain's figure had vanished. Racing back up the path, I didn't slow until I was safely inside my cottage, door locked behind me. My hands shook so badly I could barely operate the radio. Still nothing but static. I was alone with whatever was happening at Morgan's Point. I spent the afternoon searching through the lighthouse records stored in the basement, dusty logbooks and journals from previous keepers. What I found chilled me more than the encounter on the rocks. On October 21st, 1872, the lighthouse keeper was indeed Thomas Pierce, my great-great-grandfather, a fact I'd known when I took this position but had considered merely an interesting family connection. What I hadn't known was that on that night, a terrible storm had claimed the lives of 38 sailors aboard the Eleanor May, a merchant vessel returning from Europe. According to Thomas Pierce's log, he had seen the ship in distress but couldn't reach it in time. The light had gone out at a crucial moment, a mechanical failure, he claimed, though his handwriting grew erratic when describing the event, suggesting distress or dishonesty. The final entry from that night read, "They looked at me as they went down." Every face turned toward the dark lighthouse. Every hand reached out. I shall never forget their eyes. The next day's entry was brief. They came to me in dreams. They said they would return. They said they would find their way home through the one who carries both our names. The keeper's logs continued for another month, growing increasingly paranoid and incoherent, describing whispers in the fog, figures watching from the water, and messages appearing in impossible places. The final entries simply stated, "They are coming ashore tonight." I must make amends. Thomas Pierce was found 2 days later, drowned in the same waters that claimed the Eleanor May. His death was ruled a suicide. I closed the journal, mind racing. The coincidence was too perfect, too calculated. I, Eleanor Pierce, had taken this position exactly 150 years after my ancestor's death, drawn by some inexplicable calling to this remote lighthouse. And now, it seemed, something else had been waiting for me all along. The fog persisted through the afternoon, but as evening approached, it began to behave strangely. Instead of dissipating, it concentrated, forming a thick band that encircled the lighthouse, cutting it off from the mainland. Within this ring, patches of fog moved independently, drifting against the wind, sometimes forming column-like structures before dissolving again. As darkness fell, I lit every lamp in the cottage and activated the beacon. Its sweeping light created bizarre effects in the fog, sometimes seeming to illuminate figures that vanished when directly illuminated. I sat by the window, watching the hypnotic rotation of light and shadow, fighting the urge to sleep despite my exhaustion. The radio crackled suddenly to life. Through bursts of static came a voice, not the Coast Guard or any official channel, but a man speaking formally, as if from another time. The Eleanor May requests permission to dock. 38 souls aboard. We've been adrift too long, Keeper Pierce. A chill ran through me. This isn't funny, I said into the receiver. Identify yourself. More static, then, we've found our way back. 153 years on the dark waters. The lighthouse keeper betrayed us then. The lighthouse keeper will bring us home now. The transmission ended with a sound like rushing water. Outside my window, the fog began to glow with a pale, bluish light that didn't come from the beacon. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. Within its illumination, I could make out shapes moving toward shore, dozens of them, walking through water that should have been too deep to stand in. They were coming ashore, just as they had promised. And somehow, I knew they were coming for me. When the dead return, do they come seeking vengeance or redemption? I watched in frozen horror as the glowing figures moved steadily shoreward through the fog. My mind cycled frantically through explanations, hallucination, elaborate hoax, mass hysteria, though I was the only witness. None satisfied. A sharp crack from upstairs broke my paralysis. Someone, or something, was in the lighthouse. I grabbed a kitchen knife, knowing its inadequacy against whatever was happening but needing its solid weight in my hand. The stairs creaked as I ascended, each sound amplified in the unnatural silence that had fallen. The fog pressed against the windows like a living thing, obscuring the glass with tendrils that seemed to search for a way in. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, forming a small puddle on the hardwood, except when I looked closer, the liquid moved against gravity, tiny rivulets flowing uphill, converging to spell out words, "You must right the wrong." The bedroom door stood ajar, though I'd closed it earlier. Beyond it lay darkness deeper than night should allow. I pushed the door fully open, knife extended before me. The room appeared empty, moonlight filtering through a thin break in the fog outside. Then I saw them, footprints, wet and glistening on the floor, leading from the window to my bed. Not shoe prints but bare feet, as if someone had walked in from the ocean. The impressions held water that didn't soak into the wood, small pools that rippled without provocation. On my pillow lay a tarnished brass button, elaborately designed with an anchor motif. I recognized it from the naval jackets I'd found on the rocks. It hadn't been there when I'd made the bed that morning. I backed out of the room, nearly stumbling down the stairs in my haste. The cottage suddenly felt like a trap. I needed to reach the village, to find other people, witnesses who could confirm what was happening. The causeway would be clear by now. I could make it across before high tide. I grabbed my coat and flashlight, then hesitated at the front door. The fog had grown so dense it appeared solid, a wall of glowing white. Opening the door might invite whatever lurked within it to enter. A thunderous pounding shook the door, making my decision for me. I retreated to the kitchen, searching frantically for another exit. The window was too small, and the back door opened directly onto sheer rocks 30 feet above the water. The pounding continued, rhythmic and insistent. Not knuckles on wood, but something heavier, like a waterlogged fist. Water began seeping under the door, not in the normal way that rainwater might, but pulsing in with each pound, forming perfect circles on the floor that expanded and merged. "What do you want?" I shouted, though I already suspected the answer. The pounding stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, I heard a voice, garbled, as if speaking through liquid, but unmistakably human. Justice, it said. The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded before me as frost patterns formed on the windows, intricate whorls that resembled faces in agony. The radio switched on by itself, emitting not static but the sound of creaking wood and flapping canvas, the unmistakable noises of a sailing ship. I backed against the kitchen counter as the door hinges began to strain, wood splintering around the lock. Whatever was outside wanted in, and the old door wouldn't hold much longer. My eyes fell on the basement door. The lighthouse records were down there. Perhaps they contained some clue, some explanation that could help me understand what these entities wanted. I bolted for the basement just as the front door burst open. I didn't look back, didn't want to see what had gained entry. Slamming the basement door behind me, I fumbled for the light switch, then hurried down the narrow stairs. The basement was cold and damp, illuminated by a single bulb that cast more shadows than light. Shelves lined the walls, stuffed with logbooks, charts, and miscellaneous maritime equipment. In one corner stood a trunk I hadn't noticed during my earlier search, heavy oak bound with rusted metal, its lock broken long ago. Water began trickling down the stairs behind me. Not rushing, but slow and deliberate, as if someone was wringing out a soaked cloth at the top of the steps. I had minutes at most. I heaved open the trunk's lid to find a naval officer's uniform, similar to what I had seen on the rocks but in better condition. Beneath it lay a leather-bound journal, the name Thomas Pierce embossed on its cover. Not the official lighthouse log I'd read earlier, but a personal diary. I flipped it open, scanning desperately for information. The early entries detailed mundane lighthouse operations, but as I progressed, the tone changed. Thomas Pierce described an increasing obsession with a merchant ship called the Eleanor May, specifically its captain, William Blackwood. There was history between the two men. They had both loved the same woman, Eleanor Blackwood, William's sister and Thomas's fiancée. But Eleanor had died of fever mere weeks before her wedding. Thomas had taken the lighthouse keeper position afterward, isolating himself in his grief. When the Eleanor May approached during the terrible storm of 1872, Thomas recognized it. According to his feverish writing, he didn't just fail to help the ship, he deliberately extinguished the lighthouse beam, dooming the vessel and all aboard to destroy his former rival. "May God forgive me," he wrote. "I watched them founder on the rocks. I heard their screams carried on the wind." Captain Blackwood stood on the deck until the end, his eyes fixed on the dark lighthouse, on me. He knew what I had done. They all knew. The diary continued, describing Thomas's deteriorating mental state as he began experiencing supernatural events identical to what I was now facing. The dripping water, the messages, the figures in the fog. "They do not rest," he wrote in his final entry. "They cannot pass beyond without justice. I will join them tonight in the depths, but my confession alone is not enough. They say another must come, one who carries both our names, Eleanor and Pierce united. Only then can the truth be told. Only then can they find peace." The diary slipped from my trembling hands. I was the one they had waited for over a century and a half, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone who could set them free. The light flickered overhead as water pooled at the bottom of the stairs, no longer dripping but flowing steadily now. I picked up the diary again, tucking it into my coat. As I did, something fell from between its pages, a folded piece of yellow paper. Opening it revealed a hand-drawn map of the lighthouse grounds with an X marked on the northwest side, accompanied by the words "The truth lies here." A sudden crash from upstairs jolted me. They were searching the cottage now. I needed to find whatever was buried at that marked location, but first, I had to escape the basement. The small window near the ceiling offered the only exit. I dragged a heavy shelf beneath it, climbed up, and forced the rusted latch open. The window was barely wide enough for my shoulders, but desperation lent me strength. I wiggled through, scraping skin from my arms, and tumbled onto the wet grass outside. The fog had transformed. No longer formless, it had taken on the distinct shape of a sailing ship, hovering impossibly above the ground, a ghostly recreation of the Eleanor May, complete with phantom sails and spectral rigging. And moving across the grounds toward me with a crew, 38 figures composed of mist and seawater, their features blurred but their intent unmistakable. I ran toward the northwest corner of the property, consulting the map by flashlight. The marked spot lay beyond the storage shed, near the cliff edge. The figures didn't chase me, they didn't need to. They simply redirected their slow procession to intercept my path. The ground at the northwest corner showed signs of previous disturbance, not recent, but vegetation grew differently there, less dense. I fell to my knees and began digging with my bare hands, fingernails breaking against the rocky soil. The ghost sailors drew closer, their formation opening to surround me. At their center walked a taller figure, the captain, I presumed. William Blackwood, betrayed by my ancestor. I know what he did, I called out, still digging frantically. I know Thomas Pierce extinguished the light. I know he caused your deaths. The figures paused their advance but continued to close their circle around me. The captain's shape solidified slightly, features becoming more distinct, a bearded face, hollow eyes, lips drawn back from teeth and what might have been a grimace or a grin. My fingers struck something solid, a metal box about the size of a book, corroded but intact. I pried it from the earth as the ghostly sailors closed within feet of me, close enough that I could feel the unnatural cold emanating from their forms, smell the briny scent of decay that surrounded them. The box had no lock, just a simple latch crusted with rust. Inside lay an oil lamp, primitive by modern standards, but I recognized it immediately as the type used in lighthouses before electricity. Attached was a note in Thomas Pierce's handwriting, the light I extinguished. May it shine again and guide them home. Understanding bloomed. I turned to the captain's figure, holding up the lamp. This is what you've been seeking. The light that should have saved you. The ghost nodded almost imperceptibly, then extended a translucent hand toward the lamp. The other sailors mirrored the gesture, 38 hands reaching as they must have reached that night, drowning in the darkness because one man had chosen vengeance over duty. How do I light it? I asked, examining the antique lamp. The oil must be dried up after all these years. In answer, the figures began to lose cohesion, their misty forms flowing toward the lamp like water finding its level. The captain was the last to dissolve, his features holding form long enough for me to see the resemblance. He had Eleanor's eyes, my eyes. The lamp grew heavy in my hands as it absorbed the essence of the drowned sailors. The fog surrounding the lighthouse thinned, drawn toward the lamp until it glowed from within, a pale blue light that needed no oil or flame. I understood what needed to be done. The spectral crew of the Eleanor May needed their light, at last, to guide them home. I ran for the lighthouse tower, phantom lamp clutched against my chest. The beacon still rotated at the top, but its modern electric light meant nothing to souls lost in 1872. They needed the light that should have burned that night. Inside the tower, I found a spiral staircase awash with seawater that defied physics, flowing upward toward the lamp room. I followed it, taking the steps two at a time. The door at the top burst open before I reached it, wind howling into the enclosed space. The lamp room was transformed. The modern beacon had vanished, replaced by the original apparatus from Thomas Pierce's time, a brass fixture with glass prisms designed to amplify a simple flame. At the center, a space waited for the lamp I carried. Outside the glass, the ghostly ship had repositioned itself on the water where it had sunk, recreating the scene from that fateful night. I placed the phantom lamp in its rightful position. It flared to brilliant life, a beam so bright it hurt to look at, yet somehow casting no shadows. The light swept across the water, illuminating the Eleanor May in its final moment, not sinking now, but sailing onward, following the beam to safety. As I watched, the ship and its crew began to fade, not into darkness but into light, dissolving like mist under the morning sun. Captain Blackwood stood at the helm, his face now clear and human. He looked toward me, touched his hand to his forehead in a solemn salute, then turned his gaze forward as the vessel passed beyond sight. The lamp burned for several minutes more, then dimmed gradually until only the normal beacon remained, rotating steadily as it had for decades. The modern world reasserted itself around me, the familiar lamp room, the electric machinery, the ordinary night beyond the glass. But as I made my way back down the stairs, I knew Morgan's Point Lighthouse would never be the same for me. And I suspected that on particularly foggy nights, when the past seems to press close against the present, I might glimpse the Eleanor May sailing safely past, guided by the light that finally came 153 years too late. Can peace truly be made with the dead, or do they always leave something behind? 3 days passed without incident after the night I guided the Eleanor May to its long-delayed rest. The fog lifted, revealing a calm sea that betrayed no hint of the supernatural drama that had unfolded. I told myself it was over, that by fulfilling my role in their century-old story, I had released the trapped souls and could now return to my solitary existence. I was wrong. The first sign came while I was cleaning the cottage, attempting to remove the last traces of seawater that had pooled on the floors. As I mopped the kitchen, I noticed the water in my bucket turning a rusty red. Not gradually, as it might if I were cleaning up blood, but instantaneously, clear water one moment, crimson the next. I dropped the mop and backed away. The bucket tipped over, its contents spilling across the floor. Instead of flowing randomly as liquid should, the reddish water moved with purpose, forming a perfect circle around me. Within moments, I stood in the center of a crimson ring that began to emit a faint glow. "I helped you," I said aloud, my voice breaking the unnatural silence that had fallen. I lit the lamp. "You found your way home." No response came, but the circle contracted slightly, shrinking toward my feet. I stepped over it, breaking its perfect form. The liquid shivered, then resumed its circular shape with me outside its boundary. A whisper drifted through the room, so faint I might have imagined it, not all of us. I froze, eyes scanning the empty kitchen. "Who's still here? What do you want?" The red liquid began to move again, flowing toward the basement door. It seeped beneath it, leaving no trace on the floor. I hesitated only briefly before following. Whatever lingered in Morgan's Point still had something to communicate. My fear remained, but curiosity and a strange sense of responsibility propelled me forward. The basement was darker than it should have been in mid-afternoon. The single bulb glowed weakly, struggling against shadows that seemed to absorb rather than flee from its light. The red liquid had formed a trail leading to the far corner, a section I'd never fully explored, stacked with forgotten equipment and moldering boxes. Following the crimson path, I discovered a narrow door hidden behind a shelf of old logbooks. It was small, perhaps 4 feet high, with no handle or visible hinges, more like a panel than a proper door. I would have missed it entirely if not for the red liquid that had seeped into its outline, highlighting its presence. "What's in there?" I asked the empty air, not really expecting an answer. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if someone stood just behind me. Truth. I pressed against the panel. It resisted briefly, then gave way with a groan of long undisturbed wood. Beyond lay darkness so complete it seemed solid. My flashlight beam penetrated only a few feet before being swallowed by the gloom. The space beyond was roughly the size of a large closet, its walls bare stone, its floor packed earth. It appeared empty at first glance, but as I swept my light around, something gleamed in the corner, a small metal object half buried in the dirt. I knelt and began to dig with my fingers. The earth was unnaturally cold and damp, as if permanently waterlogged despite being above sea level. Within moments, I'd uncovered a pocket watch, silver, tarnished black in places, its chain tangled around what appeared to be human finger bones. I recoiled, nearly dropping my flashlight. The bones were old, fragile-looking, partially decomposed. Yet they held the watch with undeniable purpose, as if even in death, their owner had refused to relinquish this possession. The watch itself was ornate, engraved with the initials E.B. Eleanor Blackwood, I presumed. The woman Thomas Pierce had been engaged to marry, William Blackwood's sister. I pried the watch carefully from the skeletal fingers, half expecting resistance. None came. The bones simply crumbled at my touch, disintegrating into dust that swirled upward rather than settling, forming a brief, humanoid silhouette before dispersing. The watch felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, its surface ice cold despite my handling. I tried to open it, but the clasp was rusted shut. As I applied pressure, the temperature in the hidden ring plummeted. My breath clouded before me, and frost patterns formed on the stone walls, delicate, fern-like structures that resembled a woman's profile when viewed from certain angles. "Eleanor?" I whispered. "Eleanor Blackwood?" The air shifted, coalescing into a faint, shimmering outline, not substantial enough to be called a figure, more like heat distortion in the shape of a person. A woman in Victorian dress, her features indistinct but her posture one of profound sadness. "You didn't die of fever, did you?" I asked, sudden understanding dawning. "Thomas Pierce did something to you." The temperature dropped further. The watch in my hand began to vibrate, its metal case warming rapidly until it nearly burned my skin. I struggled with the clasp again, and this time it gave way. Inside was not a clock face, but a small compartment containing a folded scrap of paper and a lock of dark hair tied with faded ribbon. I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers to find a note written in a feminine hand. "My dearest William, I fear what Thomas may do. He speaks of our engagement as divine right and grows volatile when I mention ending it. Last night he threatened that if I cannot be his, I shall be no one's. I plan to leave with you when the Eleanor May returns. Until then, I keep this watch close, your gift, as proof that time carries me ever closer to freedom. Your loving sister, Eleanor." The spectral form drifted closer, the air around her rippling with emotion. I understood now. There had been two crimes, not one. Thomas Pierce hadn't just doomed the Eleanor May by extinguishing the lighthouse lamp. He had murdered Eleanor Blackwood before that, when she tried to leave him. "He buried you here," I said softly, "in this hidden room beneath the lighthouse." Then when he saw our brother's ship approaching in the storm, the temperature stabilized, neither warming nor cooling further, confirmation, I sensed, of my theory. Two tragedies bound by one man's possessive rage. Eleanor Blackwood had never had fever. She had been silenced permanently by Thomas Pierce. When her brother's ship approached during the storm, Thomas had seized the opportunity for complete revenge, extinguishing the light that should have guided the Eleanor May safely past the rocks. "You could move on," I continued even after I helped the crew find peace. Because your story remained untold. Your body undiscovered. The shimmer intensified briefly, taking on more definition, a young woman's face, beautiful and sorrowful. She gestured toward the watch in my hand, then to the earthen floor. There's more? I asked, returning to my excavation. Beneath where the watch had lain, the earth gave way more easily, as if recently disturbed. 6 inches down, my fingers touched fabric, rotted but still recognizable as fine cloth. I uncovered enough to reveal what was unmistakably human remains clad in the deteriorated remnants of a woman's dress from another century. Eleanor Blackwood had been found at last. I sat back on my heels, overwhelmed by the horror of it all. I'll notify the authorities, I promised the ghostly presence. I'll make sure you receive a proper burial. I'll make sure everyone knows what Thomas Pierce did. The shimmer brightened momentarily, then began to fade. The watch in my hand grew warm, not uncomfortably so, but with a gentle heat that felt almost like gratitude. As the ghostly figure dissipated, the hidden limb changed, the oppressive darkness lifting, the walls losing their frost patterns. What remained was simply a secret space containing long-hidden evidence of a terrible crime. I emerged from the basement with newfound purpose, immediately contacting the mainland police. I told them I discovered human remains while renovating, a partial truth that would bring investigators without revealing the supernatural aspects of my discovery. That night, as I waited for the authorities to arrive in the morning, I felt the lighthouse change around me. The inexplicable cold spots vanished. The sounds of phantom footsteps ceased. The persistent scent of seawater that had lingered in impossible places faded. Yet as I drifted towards sleep, a final whisper reached me, one remains. I bolted upright in bed, heart pounding. Who? I called into the darkness. Who still can't rest? No answer came, but my bedroom window rattled in a sudden gust of wind. Outside, the night was clear, stars shining with unusual brightness. The beam from the lighthouse swept across the water in its eternal rhythm. Then I saw him, a solitary figure standing at the cliff's edge, silhouetted against the night sky. Even at a distance, I recognized the rigid posture, the formal clothes from another era. Thomas Pierce, my ancestor, the man whose crimes had set everything in motion. Unlike the ghostly sailors or Eleanor Blackwood's diaphanous form, Thomas appeared solid, substantial, a man of flesh and blood rather than mist and memory. He turned slowly to face the lighthouse, his features becoming visible in the moonlight, a face similar to my father's, to mine. The family resemblance was undeniable. I watched, paralyzed, as he began walking toward the lighthouse with measured steps. Not toward the cottage entrance, but directly toward my bedroom window. His eyes, dark hollows in the night, fixed on mine with terrible purpose. I scrambled from bed, backing away from the window. You can't come in, I said, though I wasn't sure such rules applied to whatever Thomas Pierce had become. Your crimes have been discovered. There's nothing more you can hide. He reached the window, pressing a pale hand against the glass. His lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I edged closer, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. What do you want? I asked, still keeping my distance. His mouth moved again, and this time, though no sound penetrated the glass, I understood forgiveness. A bitter laugh escaped me. Forgiveness? For murdering an innocent woman? For dooming 38 men to death? For hiding your crimes for over a century? His expression remained impassive, but something like pain flickered in his eyes. He pressed his other hand against the glass, the gesture almost supplicating. "No," I said firmly. "I can bring justice to your victims. I can ensure they rest in peace. But forgiveness isn't mine to give." Thomas Pierce's form began to change, losing solidity, his edges blurring. Not fading into peace as the others had, but deteriorating, chunks of his appearance sawing away like rotting flesh to reveal glimpses of a skeletal structure beneath. His mouth opened in what might have been a silent scream or a plea. "You're bound here," I realized aloud. "When the others moved on, you couldn't follow. You're trapped between worlds." His deteriorating form nodded jerkily, one eye now missing, revealing an empty socket that leaked a black substance down his cheek. "And you want me to release you?" I approached the window cautiously. "You want me to forgive what you did so you can escape your punishment?" The figure that had been Thomas Pierce raised one decaying hand, now more bone than flesh, and pointed urgently toward the lighthouse tower. Not at it, but beyond it, to the small cemetery on the grounds where lighthouse keepers had traditionally been buried. Understanding dawned. "Your body," I said. "You weren't buried in the cemetery with the other keepers. Because they found you in the water. They assumed you'd fallen, or jumped." The spectral figure nodded again, more pieces sawing away, revealing a horror of partially exposed bone and sinew beneath the facade of humanity. "But you didn't jump, did you?" I pressed, a new theory forming. "The crew of the Eleanor May, they came for you that night. Just like they came for me. But you couldn't give them peace. You could only join them in death." The thing outside my window raised both hands to its face, covering what remained of its features. When it lowered them, the decay had accelerated, almost nothing human remained, just a vaguely man-shaped collection of rotting tissue and exposed skeleton, held together by the tattered remains of formal clothing. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt only sorrow, not for Thomas Pierce, but for the cycle of vengeance and suffering his actions had created. For over a century and a half, the dead had been bound to this place, unable to find rest. "I can't forgive you," I said softly. "But I can end this." I grabbed my coat and a shovel from the storage closet, then ventured out into the night. The decomposing specter followed at a distance, leaving a trail of ethereal matter that dissolved into the ground. The small cemetery contained just 6 graves, the lighthouse keepers who had served and died naturally during their tenure. A low stone wall surrounded it, more symbolic than functional. Beyond this consecrated ground lay unclaimed earth where my ancestors' remains might have been discarded, denied a proper burial because of the circumstances of his death. The entity that had been Thomas Pierce stopped at the cemetery wall, unable or unwilling to cross that boundary. It pointed with a skeletal finger to a spot just beyond, an unremarkable patch of ground covered with wild grass and small white flowers that glowed faintly in the moonlight. I began to dig, each thrust of the shovel into the earth accompanied by an unnatural echo, as if the ground itself moaned in protest. 3 feet down, I struck something solid. Clearing away the soil revealed a mass of bones, not neatly arranged as in a proper burial, but jumbled and broken, as if the body had been carelessly dumped. I stared down at the remains of Thomas Pierce, the man whose blood ran in my veins, whose sins had haunted this lighthouse for generations. Not buried, not quite discarded, but left in limbo, like his spirit. "I understand now," I said to the decomposing specter that watched from beyond the wall. "You need to be properly laid to rest. Not forgiven, but acknowledged. Not absolved, but recognized." I returned to the lighthouse, gathering sheets to serve as a makeshift shroud. By the time I returned, the spectral Thomas Pierce had deteriorated further, now little more than a suggestion of a human form, a collection of shadows and mist vaguely recalling a man. I worked methodically, gathering the scattered bones and wrapping them in the clean white sheets. There would be no headstone, no formal ceremony, but there would be recognition of a life and death that had shaped so many others. Thomas Pierce, I said formally as I refilled the improvised grave, I acknowledge your crimes and your suffering. I recognize your existence and your end. I do not forgive, but I release you from this place. As the last shovelful of earth covered the shrouded remains, the spectral form beyond the wall collapsed entirely, disintegrating into particles that scattered on the night breeze, not rising toward the stars as the crew of the Eleanor may have done, not fading gently like Eleanor Blackwood, but simply ending. No light, no peace, just absence where torment had been. It was enough. It had to be. I returned to the lighthouse as the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The familiar structure seemed different somehow, lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from its stone walls. For the first time since I'd arrived at Morgan's Point, I felt truly alone in the lighthouse, no unseen presences lurking in shadows or watching from corners. The authorities would arrive soon to investigate Eleanor Blackwood's remains. Her story would finally be told, her brother and his crew vindicated. Thomas Pierce's reputation would suffer posthumously, but historical truth mattered more than protecting a murderer's legacy. As for me, I had choices to make. I could leave Morgan's Point, find another position far from these haunted shores. Or I could stay, serve as the lighthouse keeper my family had failed to be in the past. Keep the light burning, honor the dead by protecting the living. Standing at the window, watching the morning sun chase away the last shadows of night, I knew what I would choose. Some lighthouses guide ships through darkness. This one had guided souls through something far more terrible. And now, perhaps, it could guide me as well. Is it possible to break free from the shadows of the past, or do they forever shape our future? 1 year after the events that had exposed the dark secrets of Morgan's Point, I stood at the railing of the lighthouse gallery, watching autumn storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The anniversary had been on my mind for weeks, bringing both unease and a strange sort of peace. The police investigation into Eleanor Blackwood's remains had concluded months ago. Historical records confirmed her existence and her connection to Thomas Pierce, though official reports listed her cause of death as indeterminate after so many years. The crew of the Eleanor may have received renewed recognition in maritime records, their tragedy recontextualized as negligence rather than unfortunate accident. I had chosen to stay, continuing my role as keeper of Morgan's Point Lighthouse. The isolation that had once attracted me now felt different, not lonely but purposeful, a conscious vigil rather than an escape from the world. The cottage had changed, too. I'd renovated extensively, removing the hidden room in the basement, replacing floors stained with spectral seawater, repainting walls where ghostly messages had appeared. Physical reminders of the supernatural events had been systematically erased, though their memory remained vivid in my mind. Most days, the lighthouse functioned as any other, a navigation aid, a historical landmark occasionally visited by tourists from the mainland. I maintained the beacon, gave brief tours to visitors, and lived a quiet existence. But as the anniversary approached, I found myself watching the sea with increasing vigilance, searching for signs that not everything had been resolved. The pocket watch, Eleanor Blackwood's possession that had led me to her remains, now sat on my mantelpiece, restored and functioning. It kept perfect time, despite its age and condition when discovered. Each tick seemed to measure more than seconds, counting down to something I couldn't define. That morning, I'd woken from a dream of drowning, water filling my lungs as I tried to call for help. The sensation had been so vivid that I'd spent several minutes simply breathing, reassuring myself that air, not water, filled my chest. Outside my window, the sea had been unnaturally still, reflecting the gray sky like burnished metal. Now, as evening approached, the barometer was dropping rapidly. Weather reports warned of a significant storm system, not unusual for October, but the timing felt significant. 1 year ago exactly, the ghosts of the Eleanor May had come ashore. 1 year ago, I had uncovered the truth that had freed them. Or had I? The question had nagged at me intermittently. The crew had found peace when I lit the spectral lamp. Eleanor Blackwood had faded after her remains were discovered. Even Thomas Pierce had disappeared when given a proper burial of sorts. But something about the resolution felt incomplete, a story missing its final paragraph. As darkness fell, I activated the beacon, watching its powerful beam sweep across the increasingly turbulent water. The familiar mechanical rhythm usually brought comfort, but tonight it seemed ominous, each rotation revealing something different in the darkness beyond. I retreated to the cottage as rain began to fall, heavy drops that struck the windows like knuckles rapping on glass. The wind rose quickly, moaning around the stone walls in a way that sounded disturbingly like my name. I tried to dismiss it as imagination, heightened by the anniversary, but found myself checking and rechecking the locks on the doors. By midnight, the storm had reached its full fury. Waves crashed against the rocks below with such force that spray reached my second-floor windows. Lightning flashed almost continuously, briefly illuminating a sea churned to froth by the relentless wind. I sat in the living room, pretending to read but actually listening, for footsteps, for whispers, for any sign that the past was reaching into the present once more. The pocket watch on the mantel ticked steadily, each sound amplified in my hyperware state. The power flickered, then failed completely. I lit candles, their wavering flames creating dancing shadows on the walls. The backup generator should have activated automatically to keep the beacon functioning, but a quick glance out the window confirmed my fear. The lighthouse stood dark against the storm-racked sky. I knew my duty. Without the beacon, ships could founder on the treacherous rocks surrounding Morgan's Point. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight, steeling myself to venture into the tower. The moment I opened the door, wind tore it from my grasp, slamming it against the wall. Rain struck my face with stinging force as I fought my way across the short distance to the tower entrance. My flashlight beams seemed feeble against the overwhelming darkness. Inside the tower, the spiral staircase disappeared upward into gloom. Water streamed down the steps, rainwater forced through cracks in the old stonework, I told myself, though it seemed to flow with unnatural purpose. I began the climb, each step bringing a sense of déjà vu so powerful it nearly stopped me in my tracks. Halfway up, I paused, training my flashlight on the wall. For a moment, I thought I saw words forming in the rivulets of water, but they dissipated before I could read them. Just imagination, I insisted to myself. Just memory playing tricks. The lamp room was in darkness, the electric mechanism silent. I crossed to the control panel, checking for obvious problems. The generator had failed to engage, a mechanical issue, not supernatural. I could fix this. As I worked to restore power, lightning flashed continuously outside, illuminating the churning sea below. In one brilliant burst, I saw something that stopped my heart momentarily, a ship where no ship should be, alarmingly close to the rocks. I abandoned the control panel and pressed against the glass, straining to see through the rain-lashed darkness. Another lightning flash revealed nothing. No ship, no danger. Had I imagined it? I returned to my task, fingers working quickly to bypass the automated system and restore manual power to the beacon. Success came moments later, the lamp hummed to life, its powerful beam penetrating the storm. Relief flooded me, followed immediately by unease. The storm felt too familiar, the sequence of events too similar to that night a year ago. As if on cue, my radio crackled to life, making me jump despite myself. Static hiss from the speaker, interspersed with fragments of what might have been words. I adjusted the dial, seeking clarity. The static cleared momentarily, and a voice spoke, not waterlogged or ghostly, but clear and professional. Distress call from the New Eleanor, pleasure craft, 7 souls aboard. Taking on water approximately 2 miles off Morgan's Point. Coordinates. My blood ran cold. The New Eleanor? The coincidence seemed impossible. I grabbed the radio, responding immediately, "This is Morgan's Point Lighthouse. I copy your distress call. Coast Guard has been notified. Beacon is active to guide you away from the rocks. Over." More static, then engine failure, drifting toward, can't maintain. The transmission cut out abruptly. I tried repeatedly to re-establish contact, but received only static in return. Outside, the beacon swept across the turbulent waters, revealing nothing unusual, no vessel in distress, no struggling survivors. Then I saw it, not on the water, but in the sky. A pale blue light, similar to the spectral glow that had surrounded the Eleanor May's crew a year ago, hovering about a quarter-mile offshore. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. Without conscious decision, I found myself racing down the spiral staircase, driven by instinct rather than reason. Whatever was happening, I needed to be closer, needed to see clearly. Outside, the storm seemed to part around me, rain and wind continuing unabated but somehow no longer affecting me. I ran toward the cliff edge, toward the point that would give me the best view of the area where I'd seen the light. The blue glow had intensified, now clearly illuminating what appeared to be a modern yacht struggling against massive waves. Even at a distance, I could see figures moving on the deck, working desperately to control the vessel as it was driven inexorably toward the rocks. "No," I whispered. "Not again." I pulled out my phone, dialing emergency services with trembling fingers. The call connected, surprising me given the storm's intensity. "There's a boat in trouble off Morgan's Point," I reported urgently. "The New Eleanor, reportedly 7 people aboard. They're dangerously close to the rocks." "Ma'am," the dispatcher responded calmly, "we have no reports of a vessel by that name in distress. The Coast Guard has been monitoring all channels due to the storm warning." "I can see them," I insisted. "Please, send help before it's too late." "We'll relay your report," the dispatcher promised. "But all vessels were advised to seek harbor hours ago. It's unusual that anyone would be out in these conditions." The call ended, leaving me alone with my certainty that history was somehow repeating itself. The blue light continued to pulse, illuminating the struggling yacht as it fought against nature's fury. Without thinking through the consequences, I began making my way down the treacherous path to the shore. If rescue wasn't coming, perhaps I could do something, signal with a flashlight, throw a line, anything to prevent another tragedy at Morgan's Point. The descent was perilous, rocks slippery with rain and sea spray. Twice I nearly fell, saved only by grabbing at vegetation growing from cracks in the stone. The roar of the surf grew louder as I approached the shore, waves crashing against the rocks with devastating force. From this vantage point, the yacht seemed even closer to destruction, repeatedly lifted by massive swells that threatened to dash it against the jagged stones. The blue light surrounding it pulsed faster now, almost frantically. "Hold on!" I shouted, but my voice could never carry above the storm. "Help is coming." As if in response, the blue light suddenly expanded, encompassing not just the yacht but reaching toward me on the shore. Within its glow, I could see the faces of those aboard, a family group, it appeared. Parents, children, perhaps grandparents. 7 souls in total, their features etched with terror. The light touched me, cold yet not unpleasant. And with the contact came understanding, these people were not from my time. The vessel I saw was not struggling in the present but in the past. 1 year ago exactly, the New Eleanor had met its fate on these rocks during the same storm that had awakened the crew of the original Eleanor May. I was witnessing an echo, a replay of a tragedy I had somehow missed while focusing on the supernatural events within the lighthouse. While I had been communicating with century-old ghosts, a real vessel with real people had been lost just offshore. "Why are you showing me this?" I called out to the empty air. "Why now, when it's too late to help them?" The blue light contracted suddenly, condensing into a humanoid shape on the rocks beside me, a figure composed of light rather than mist or water. It had no distinct features, but its form suggested a man of middle age, solidly built. "Because they are trapped, just as we were," a voice said, not aloud but directly in my mind. Caught between moments, unable to move forward or back. "Who are you?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "I was Captain James Reynolds," the light figure responded. "That is my family on the New Eleanor. We were coming to see the lighthouse, my ancestral home. The storm caught us unprepared." "Your ancestral home?" I repeated, confused. "I am descended from Thomas Pierce," the light explained. "As are you. We are distant cousins, Eleanor. My grandmother told stories of this place, of the lighthouse keeper who disappeared during a terrible storm. I wanted my children to see it." The revelation hit me with physical force. Not just any vessel had been lost that night, but one carrying the blood of Thomas Pierce, another branch of my own family tree, unknown to me until this moment. "You didn't make it," I said softly. "None of you did." "No," James Reynolds confirmed. "But unlike the crew of the first Eleanor May, we had no unfinished business, no betrayal to avenge. We simply lingered, watching as you discovered the old truths, as you set the others free. But you've shown yourself now," I pointed out. "Why wait a year?" "Because the circle is not complete," he explained. "Thomas Pierce caused death through intentional neglect of his duty. His redemption must come through someone of his blood fulfilling that same duty. You lit the beacon for the original crew, but there was no light for us." "Not really." I understood suddenly, painfully. When I had arrived at Morgan's Point, the automated systems were already in place. The lighthouse required maintenance, occasional monitoring, but not the constant vigilance of earlier eras. On the night the New Eleanor had faced destruction, I had been in the basement, discovering old logbooks. I had neglected the vigilance that might, just might, have spotted them in time. "What can I do?" I asked. "I can't change the past." "No," James agreed. "But you can acknowledge it. As you did for Thomas. As you did for the others." The spectral yacht began to fade, the blue light diminishing. Time was short. "How?" I demanded. "Tell me how to help you." The light, James said, his own form starting to disperse. "The true light. Not electricity. Not technology. The Keeper's light." With those cryptic words, both James Reynolds and the vision of the New Eleanor vanished, leaving me alone on the storm-lashed shore, rain mingling with tears on my face. I made my way back up the treacherous path, mind racing. What had he meant by the keeper's light? The antique lamp that had guided the crew of the original Eleanor may have been spectral itself, a manifestation rather than a physical object. Back in the cottage, I searched frantically through the few possessions I'd kept from that night a year ago. Thomas's diary, Eleanor Blackwood's pocket watch, the brass button from a naval uniform. Nothing that suggested a physical lamp. Then my eyes fell on the watch, ticking steadily on the mantelpiece. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The initials EB caught the candlelight, seeming to glow momentarily with the same blue luminescence I'd seen offshore. Sudden inspiration struck. I hurried to the basement, to a corner where I'd stored items removed during the renovation. Among them was the trunk that had contained Thomas Pierce's personal diary. I hadn't discarded it, merely relocated it. Inside, beneath where the diary had been, lay a small tin box I hadn't examined closely before. It was locked, but the aged metal gave way easily when I applied pressure. Inside lay a brass key, ornately designed with a flame motif, and a folded note yellowed with age. The note read simply, "The eternal flame awaits its keeper. Tower room, north stone, third from floor." I rushed to the lighthouse tower, climbing the spiral staircase with renewed purpose. The lamp room's north wall contained decorative stonework, concentric circles surrounding what appeared to be solid segments. The third stone from the floor was slightly discolored compared to its neighbors. I pressed against it experimentally. Nothing happened. Then I noticed a small indentation in the center, roughly key-shaped. I inserted the brass key from the tin box, turned it clockwise, and felt a mechanism release. The stone swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Within lay an oil lamp of ancient design, not the functional type used to illuminate the beacon in previous centuries, but something far older. Its metal surface was inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize, and its reservoir contained liquid that couldn't possibly be oil, not after all this time. The fluid glowed faintly with an inner blue light. I understood what I needed to do. Taking the lamp carefully, I climbed to the gallery surrounding the beacon. The storm continued unabated, rain and wind lashing at me as I emerged onto the narrow walkway. I raised the lamp high, its blue glow intensifying as it contacted the rain. "Reynolds family," I called into the storm. "James, and all aboard the new Eleanor. I acknowledge your passing. I recognize my failure at duty. I light this beacon for you now, though it comes too late." I unstopped the lamp. The liquid within caught flame immediately despite the rain, burning with an intense blue fire that expanded outward in a perfect sphere. It encompassed the lighthouse, then expanded further, reaching toward the spot where I'd seen the spectral yacht. The modern beacon continued its mechanical rotation beside me, but this older light, this keeper's light, burned steady and true, pointing not toward safe harbor but toward whatever lay beyond this world. Out on the water, blue shapes formed, 7 figures standing not on a vessel but directly on the turbulent surface. They raised their arms in unison, not in supplication as the crew of the Eleanor may have done, but in farewell. The tallest figure, James Reynolds, I presumed, nodded once in my direction. Then, as one, the 7 turned and walked away across the water, fading gradually until only the storm remained. The lamp in my hands burned for several minutes more, then dimmed naturally, its purpose fulfilled. The hidden reservoir was now empty, the ancient fuel consumed in this final duty. As I returned inside, I felt the lighthouse change around me, not dramatically as before, but subtly, settling into itself like an old house finally at peace. The structure had witnessed tragedy and betrayal, death and redemption across 3 centuries. Now, perhaps, those cycles had been broken. I replaced the lamp in its hidden compartment, somehow knowing it would never be needed again. The key I kept, adding it to the chain of Eleanor Blackwood's pocket watch, two artifacts from different branches of the same twisted family tree. The storm began to abate as dawn approached, clouds thinning to reveal glimpses of stars. I stood at the gallery railing, watching the first hint of light touch the eastern horizon. Morgan's Point would always be a place of memory now, but memories without the power to harm. 6 months later, a memorial stone was erected on the lighthouse grounds, commemorating both the crew of the Eleanor May and the Reynolds family aboard the new Eleanor. Local maritime records were amended to include both tragedies, but only I knew how they had truly been resolved. I remained as keeper of Morgan's Point Lighthouse, but my role had evolved. Beyond maintaining the modern navigation aids, I now saw myself as keeper of stories, guardian of truths that might otherwise be lost to time. I began researching other lighthouses along the coast, discovering patterns of unexplained phenomena that suggested similar unresolved histories. The pocket watch and brass key became my talismans, reminders of duty fulfilled and balance restored. Occasionally, during storms, I would feel a presence in the lighthouse, but never threatening, merely watchful. The spirits of Morgan's Point had found their peace, but their memory lingered in the stones and salt air. 2 years after that final revelation, I received a letter from a historical society in Boston. They had uncovered documents relating to Thomas Pierce and the original Eleanor May tragedy. Would I be willing to share what I knew of the lighthouse's history? I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. Some secrets needed keeping, but others demanded the light of truth. I would tell what I could, omitting the supernatural elements while ensuring Eleanor Blackwood's murder and the fate of both ships were properly documented. As I sealed my response, the pocket watch on my desk ticked with particular resonance. Outside, the beacon swept across calm waters, guiding modern vessels safely past the rocks where 2 ships had met their fate. The cycle of tragedy had been broken, but the duty remained to keep the light burning, to remember those lost, and to ensure no more souls would be trapped between worlds at Morgan's Point. In the end, perhaps that was the true purpose of any lighthouse, not just to warn of physical dangers, but to stand as a beacon between realms, guiding the living safely through darkness and offering the dead a light by which to find their way home. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.